Good evening and welcome to the Planning South Committee meeting. Before I move to agenda item number 1, I'd like to welcome speakers we have this evening. May I remind you that this meeting is at which public are present is not a public meeting. We're not expecting any fire alarms to go off this evening, so if they do go off, please make your exit the nearest exit to you, and we meet in the bandstand in Horsham. Members of the public, if you could switch your phones off or switch them to silent. And when members are voting, please could you ensure that you raise your hand very clearly so that we can make sure we've got an accurate count. I'd also point out that we've got quite a lot of speakers this evening, and we will be ensuring that you meet the 2-minute limit that we've assigned to you. And also for members, when asking questions, could you be concise in asking your questions? Thank you very much. Before we start the agenda of the meeting, could the officers introduce themselves, please?
Good evening, Jason Hawkes, Principal Planning Officer.
Nick Pettifer, Senior Planning Officer.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Claire Brown, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Laurel Tilbury, Committees Officer.
And just a final reminder, when speaking, make sure your microphone is on so the public can hear you, members. And when you finish speaking, could you make sure that your microphone is switched to off? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Apologies for absence.
Hello, thank you. Apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Councillors Claudia Fisher and Josh Potts.
Could I add to that, Councillor John Milne?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Declaration of members' interest. Councillor Knoll. Okay, I have a declaration.
Sorry, could Councillor Knoll perhaps explain what the nature of the interest is, please?
Yes, thank you. I realised I didn't have my mic on, so for the record, I am declaring an interest in DC 231631, and my interest is that I knew the applicants some time ago, but I have stayed in touch with them. Thank you.
Okay, I also have to declare an interest. The DC 231631, the owners of that, or the applicants, are neighbours of mine, and therefore I will be stepping down from the chair for that particular item, and Vice Chair Councillor Knowles will be dealing with that particular application, and I also will be leaving the room. I noticed there are some people from Parish Council, Pulborough Parish Council, which I'm a member, but I'm not on the planning committee. I've not dealt with any planning issues or planning applications at Pulborough. Just for clarity on that.
Yeah, that's a question.
Chairman?
Oh, sorry.
Yep, sorry. Who's going to go first? Okay, Councillor Lambert.
Sorry, I just need to give Joy Dennis's apologies. She just messaged me. She can't make it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Beard.
I too also need to declare an interest on DC 231631 due to the fact that I taught both their children and have known them for some time.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Beard. Councillor Campbell.
Like you, I'm also a member of Pulborough Parish Council, and like you, I'm not on the planning committee.
Okay.
So I'll share that.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Shall we make the trio complete?
Absolutely. That's three of a kind.
Same
isn't it?
thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no announcements from myself this evening or from the Chief Exec. Appeals, draw your attention to the list of appeals on the agenda, in the agenda pack. Are there any comments? Thank you. And I've jumped ahead of myself because I should have mentioned the minutes before I did that, but no one picked me up. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. The first application considered this evening is DC 21-2466, which is Green Dean, Staines Street, Codmore Hill, Pulborough. Before asking the officers to present, I'd like to remind the committee this was previously deferred for clarification on three matters. That was sewage capacity, confirmation on the costing and provision of the miniature stoplights were two of the three considerations that we need to be mindful of this evening. If we could just bear in mind those considerations when discussing this particular application. Thank you. And I invite the officer to present this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The third item, which was sought for clarification, was an assessment of the new vehicular access from the site onto the A29. So that represents the third item for clarification. By way of an overview, the application seeks outline permission for up to 65 new dwellings on a site that lies adjacent to and between the Codmore Hill and the Pulborough settlement areas, noting that part of the site is also within the built-up area itself. The proposal has been amended to address officer concerns and can demonstrate a water-neutral position achieved by way of efficiency measures on site and offsetting at the Hepworth's Brewery site. The site can achieve suitable density for its location, with the ability to include a robust landscape scheme and boundary vegetation that helps to define the site and its existing vegetated edges. Officers note the fact that the site has not been allocated as a potential development site in the draft Pulborough Neighbourhood Plan nor in the draft Reg 19 local plan document. However, officers also acknowledge that at the current time, the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply position, and therefore it is in a vulnerable position in terms of housing delivery. So just as an overview, this was the proposed site layout and an indicative section through the site. Turning now to the three queries which formed the basis of the deferral at the January meeting. Officers understand the concerns with local drainage issues in the area. However, Southern Water are responsible as the body for providing sewerage in the area, and as such have assessed the proposal by way of their modelling data, which assumes a peak flow discharge per dwelling of 0.05 litres per second. Hence the assessment that for 65 dwellings, the anticipated peak flow discharge to the network would be 0.65 litres per second. Southern Water are satisfied that the system can accommodate the additional flow arising from the development proposal. As officers, we understand that in some instances, Southern Water do request a phased connection to developments in the event that there are capacity issues in the local area. But it's worth noting that they have not requested this phased approach in this instance. Southern Water are also responsible for implementing improvements to the system, so that lies entirely within their remit. So therefore, in terms of the sewerage capacity, officers consider that the application site would not lead to adverse issues in terms of the local capacity issues. Turning to point number 2, Network Rail have confirmed that the additional funding for any miniature stoplights at the crossing point, should the project cost more than the requested £500,000, would come from other funding sources or other projects. However, as they are reaching an advanced stage in securing the delivery of the footbridge at the crossing point, which was to be delivered as part of the approved development scheme at the New Place Farm site to the south, it is likely that the miniature stoplights at the crossing point would not be required. Turning to the third point, West Sussex Highways have confirmed that the Stage 1 road safety audit, which is submitted as part of the application documents, identified that the required visibility display to the north would require the removal of parked vehicles in the verge. Shown on this image here, this is the slight detail of the access point. These works would be secured by way of the associated Section 278 Highways Agreement and any Stage 2 road safety audit, which would follow on from any approval. This would secure any new bollards in the verge and the repainting of the lines outside of Arran Garage, where the footway gives way to the dropped curb outside the garage. With the above responses in mind, officers resubmit the recommendation to permit the outline approval subject to the conditions shown and subject to the approval of a Section 106 agreement to secure the offsetting water neutrality measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the first public speaker, please, Claire Bartlett. And be mindful you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I just wanted to comment on a few points raised at the last meeting. It was mentioned that the neighbourhood plan examiner dismissed this site in favour of others, but that isn't quite correct, as that was not within his remit. Examiners are only required to consider whether a plan as presented is sound. They don't assess every site being considered for allocation, and they didn't consider this particular site in that instance. It's also not quite correct to suggest the neighbourhood plan is representative of the views of local residents, appreciating it's very difficult to engage everyone in the plan process. But in this instance, just 22 residents supported the neighbourhood plan, which is less than 0.5% of the population of the parish. In relation to infrastructure concerns, the examiner advised in his report that a neighbourhood plan cannot disregard the housing needs of existing and future residents. He also acknowledged that development brings opportunities to fund infrastructure improvements through means such as the Community Infrastructure Levy, and in this case the developer will need to pay around £1.2 million in CIL, which will be available to both the parish and district councils to spend. Horsham District Council considered this site to be suitable for development, which is why it was included in the Regulation 18 draft local plan. It was only removed from the Regulation 19 plan due to concerns that further development in the north of the village would exacerbate existing and ongoing issues reported with the foul sewers. This has been proven not to be the case. Southern Water has been consulted 4 times now on this application, and each time they've confirmed they have no concerns. Clear evidence has been submitted with the application to demonstrate that planning permission can be approved. This is a well-considered scheme that will deliver much-needed homes, including affordable homes. It has the support of your officers, and we hope you will similarly be able to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. Michael Stevens, please.
Good evening, Michael Stevens from Castle Properties. I'm the applicant. Southern Water has now responded to 4 separate consultations from Horsham regarding the capacity of the foul water sewer. The latest response from the Head of Future Growth confirms that yet again that there is capacity within the existing sewers. Southern Water is legally obligated to provide developers with the right to connect to a public sewer. It is not entitled to reject connections based on capacity issues. Furthermore, existing sewage issues are the responsibility of Southern Water to resolve, funded through infrastructure charges paid by the developer. Together, this ensures that sewer capacity and existing infrastructure are not a barrier to development and not grounds for refusing planning permission. On a more general note, when new homes are proposed, it seems like everybody objects. There is a silent majority who are overlooked in the planning system. In every part of the UK, the majority of young people are in favour of building more homes, but local planning officers and councillors rarely hear from them. We wanted to balance the right of objectors to be heard with the right of supporters, so we commissioned specialist consultants to reach out to local residents to find out their views on proposed development. Over the past 2.5 years, Horsham District Council has received 12 letters of objection to the proposed scheme. But in the last 5 days, 16 local residents have responded in support of the proposed scheme. And these comments, together with their names and addresses, have been submitted to Horsham District Council. A whole generation who can't even afford to rent, let alone buy, because of the lack of support, are never represented here where the decisions are made. Current rules put too much power in the hands of people who already own their own homes. Whilst we entirely support the neighbourhood plans, in this instance the neighbourhood plan hasn't been subject to a referendum, so it's impossible to know if residents would support the plan as a whole. More importantly, Horsham cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply of deliverable houses, with the supply currently calculated at 2.9 years and getting significantly worse. In these circumstances, the NPPF dictates there is a presumption in favour of development, and the planning permission should be granted.
Could you bring your points to a conclusion, please?
Yeah. Officers have concluded that the proposed development would result in substantial housing benefits that outweigh any conflict with the HDPF and the post-examination Pulborough neighbourhood plan. This site is needed in addition to the sites proposed by the draft neighbourhood plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Andy Hepworth, be mindful you have 2 minutes, so please.
Okay, I'm chairman and founder of Hepworth Brewery at Pulborough. We're a local brewery in the heart of West Sussex. We moved to the current location in opposite Brinsbury in 2016 with overwhelming support from the council for our plans that have allowed us to continue trading within the Horsham district. Our site employs 25 people and provides specialist training for brewing. We're also a popular visitor attraction, hosting 1,500 people a year. When we built the brewery at Brinsbury, we're keen to make it as energy efficient as possible. We've got solar panels on our roofs, A+ buildings, unique beds to deal with part of our effluent, and the heat from our chillers, which have been converted to beer, the world's first beer source heat pump, helps both heat the buildings and preheat our water for brewing. But we want to do more. We use large volumes of water daily to wash down equipment and know we could make substantial water savings by employing new technologies and automated systems if we had the capital to invest. When the applicants approached us 2 years ago to collaborate with them to find a water neutrality solution for our site, we were delighted. The applicants funded a specialist consultant, Projective Engineering, to identify ways in which the water could be saved. They identified several opportunities for water recovery which could save 3,300 cubic metres of water per annum, and this would increase as our production increased. So the applicants are willing to fund the water saving measures up to an estimated cost of £236,000. The application is a collaborative effort, and that will be a significant benefit to the brewery, both reducing its environmental impact and as a big part of our route to net zero.
Could you bring your statement to a conclusion, please?
That's why I'm speaking on behalf of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Tilbrook, and I believe you're speaking on behalf of Pulborough Parish Council, and therefore you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you all. This application was looked at as part of the Pulborough Neighbourhood Plan, which is a competitive process. The best sites in those put forward are accepted and taken forward. Those which are deemed less good are not taken forward. This was clearly in the not so good ones and is not being taken forward in the neighbourhood plan. However, were this site to be approved, it would undermine the next phase of assessment of the neighbourhood plan. Pulborough Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group rejected several hundred houses on the other side of the A29. So I'm going to do a brief comparison of Greendean with equivalent site of equivalent size on the other side of the A29. First point is that without the bridge over the railway line, parents from Greendean wanting to use a primary school would have to get their children to cross the busy A29 twice. A development on the other side of the A29, they would only have to cross the A29 once. So getting a bridge in as a firm solution is essential if this site is to gain any weight in the second phase of the neighbourhood plan. The other point is the use of the handling of drainage, water and sewerage. In this site, it's all gathered together. It's a steep slope. It all has to be pumped up to the top and into the sewerage system. On the other side, you can capture grey water and other drainage water and perhaps put it through a reedy pond, such as is available at Epworth. And there's less impact on the drainage and sewerage. Drainage and sewerage is a very important issue, and Southern Water in their modelling assume a standard 10% of the capacity of the pipe is occupied by drainage water. In this area, this is simply not the case. We have a pumping station down by the entrance to Tesco's, which has water bowsed away from it regularly because it is operating at capacity. There's also, of interest, a house called Ovingdean, just to the north of there, but at a similar level, which has a permanent monitoring of water levels and sewerage levels installed. I suggest that we need to go back to Southern Water and ask whether they could tell us what the level of water in that measured borehole is. It's been monitored for over a year, and get that figure used in their modelling studies, which are a purely theoretical exercise, which are pretty unrealistic. The other point, final point on the comparison between the Greendean side and the other side, is that although some road accesses onto the A29 on the other side of the road are worse than Greendean, some are undoubtedly better. So there are compelling reasons that take the view that any reasonable person would tend to approve sites on the western side of the A29 and reject those on the eastern side of the A29, unless something exceptional was done, such as being able to provide that bridge, which would be a ramped bridge on the north side, on the north side, and it will be level when it arrived at the top of the south side, so that mothers with one child and a buggy can use these safely and not have to travel down dangerous highway and cross it too many times. Now, if Greendean is improved now, then it completely undermines the grounds we have for making any rational assessment on the sites of the other side of the A29 come the first revision of the neighbourhood plan. So for all of these reasons, I urge this committee to reject the Greendean proposal and to leave it to the second stage of the neighbourhood plan, in which time I hope that the owners of Greendean and the owners of New Place nurseries will have time to get together with local people and firmly secure a safe pedestrian bridge across the railway. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The provision of the footbridge at the railway crossing is going to be secured as part of the New Place Farm development proposal. So that is, in all likeliness, taking place. I am aware that Network Rail are reaching sort of the final stages of securing that footbridge. And in terms of the Southern Water modelling, we have Southern Water and their assessment to make our planning assessment on, as they are the providers and the undertakers for sewerage in this instance. So,
And just to remind members, and the chairman did mention this, obviously this was deferred at planning committee for 3 reasons which we've detailed, and that should really be the focus of the assessment, unless there are material changes which alter the position that the committee took last time. So I think we just need to bear in mind the consistency in decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite the ward councillors to speak. So, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank officers for all the work they did interrogating Southern Water and getting some information and data out of them. And for that, thank you for doing that. I know it's not easy. I listened to interested what was said, but I think the points I would make is that first, the draft neighbourhood plan, as it stands at the moment, provides the number of houses that are required that were outlined in the housing needs surveys that were done for the village. Therefore, it would be regrettable, in a way, to undermine any referendum for the neighbourhood plan by pushing ahead with a site that was not included for good reasons in that neighbourhood plan. One could argue that it would undermine the validity of the neighbourhood plan. The comment was made that only 3 people, there was a limited number of people who commented on the neighbourhood plan. Well, that's obvious because there's not been a referendum. So, the issues about Southern Water I find interesting because everybody says Southern Water says it's not a problem. Actually, if you read the documentation, it says very clearly that capacity is a problem in the village because, to quote, they say there's a dynamic issue downstream. Now, Southern Water would say that there is no problem in capacity in the sewers, and I would agree with that in normal weather. Normal weather being it's not tipping down rain. Just look outside. When it rains, and if you look at climate change that we've been having heavy dumps of rain on a consistent basis. And what happens then is the sewers overload, and Southern Water admit this. If I draw your attention to paragraph 4.3 of the report, it is very clear that we're having 620 hours of sewage so far discharged into the river which is being used more and more for leisure and more for other activities. So, there is a human health issue here. Now, the argument is that we've got a system pumping up the sewage up to the top of the road and it's left to go into the sewers. That's true. But if the sewers are already overloaded by rainwater and you're pumping more up to join it, you're just making the problem worse. I'm not surprised and I'm disappointed that Southern Water didn't actually say they were going to try and address this issue. And I certainly know that some of my colleagues around this table are not very happy in terms of sewage with Southern Water and the rivers that we depend on. I also draw members' attention, because it's sort of been skated over, when it looks at the railway crossing. And I do have some concerns on what was said in there. Because if you read the report carefully, particularly paragraphs 4.2, 4.21, 4.22 and 4.23, yes, there's an outline planning permission that gives a stepped footbridge across the railway. Please note, stepped, not ramped. So basically people can walk across, but mothers with pushchairs or invalid buggies and stuff are still having to go down the A29 and cross the A29, as was stated earlier on. I'm also concerned in paragraph 4.21 that if the outline planning permission for the nursery site doesn't go ahead, they're then going to resolve to go for these traffic lights, if I can call them that, across the railway crossing. But it says here there'd be a funding shortfall in the event that the more costly integrated system is required at the site, estimated at £800,000. And Network Rail aren't going to stump up the cost.
So my question is, if that footbridge doesn't happen and Green Dean goes on ahead without the other site, who's going to pay the difference? That is not answered in this. I don't have any comment on the highways issues. I didn't expect to have any, but I'm glad that the office has clarified the highways issues that I did raise at the earlier meeting, and for that I thank them. It set my mind at rest, at least on the highways issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Insofar as the occupation of this site, it would be tied to the delivery of that footbridge, even though there's no requirement for the developer on this site to actually provide the footbridge, because that's entirely within the adjacent development at New Place Farm. But we would be looking to secure a Section 106 clause that this application site couldn't be occupied beyond the 51st dwelling until that footbridge was provided. So in effect, it does tie the two developments together in relying on that footbridge being in place.
Councillor Clark.
Well, can I seek a clarification then? So what you're saying is we would have like a Grampian condition on this development? Insofar, why don't we just go the whole hog and put a Grampian condition on it? No development until the other one goes ahead. And it has to be a ramped footbridge.
I think as far as we understand, Network Rail are progressing at quite an advanced stage at securing the footbridge as part of the New Place Farm development. I also understand that they have undertaken feasibility works in trying to establish whether a ramped footbridge could be put on that site, but there's quite a lot of land take that is involved. So Network Rail have undertaken that piece of work. So the stepped footbridge is at this stage the only thing they could provide on that site. It's also noted that the footbridge has to be quite high because of potential electrification plans of that railway line. So that also adds to the increased land take for providing a ramped footbridge or ramped bridge at that site.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to agree with everything Councillor Clark said so far. There's a couple of extra bits I want to add. We were quoted a figure in terms of peak flow sewer output from the site, and the figure of 0.65 litres per second was used. That's an average, not a peak. The peak is 3 litres per second. Just wanted to point that out, which would obviously add significantly to the load in the sewers. In terms of visibility, I read the papers, and it said that there'd been a speed survey carried out confirming that traffic is generally decelerating as it travels southward into the village from the 40 miles an hour to the 30 miles an hour zone. I think the key word there is generally. It just takes one person driving excessively fast to go into this the entrance of this new development, which is already overloaded with entrance from the Arran garage, the entrance from the stables, and the entrance from Sainsbury's. It's already a very complicated junction. And in terms of accessibility, I think the whole idea of the footbridge over the railway line is a bit of a red herring, because as Councillor Clark said, anyone travelling from the north of the village towards a school with a buggy, or even with a couple of children, would find it very difficult to negotiate the ramp down to the railway line, up the steps and across the railway line on the step bridge and up the ramp the other side. So I think the major issue is accessibility across, I think, Pitching Gate Bridge, which is excessively narrow, especially if you have a double buggy, and there have been quite a lot of comments made on local social media about that exact issue.
Thank you.
I think coming back to the point of the 3 litres per second, that's the capacity of the pumping station. Again, Southern Water use their modelling data to arrive at an output from these developments, and that is the mechanism they use to assess their network capacity.
I think we just have to bear in mind we're not drainage engineers as planning officers, and obviously we've consulted Southern Water as the provider of that infrastructure, and obviously have consulted them 4 times, including with the queries following the previous deferral, and then Southern Water have confirmed that they consider the proposal as acceptable. So I think we're in a difficult position really, unless we think we've got sufficient evidence that that's contrary to that, but ultimately we've got Southern Water saying that is acceptable and it can be managed. So it does put us in a very difficult position to really raise sufficient concerns to go against those comments. So I think we just need to be mindful of that when we consider that point. Thank you.
Yeah, just my point about the 0.65 versus the 3 litres per second was more of a clarification. But the problem I have is with the Southern Water use the River Arun as excess capacity for whatever is overflowing. So I'm not really sure I would place too much weight on their comments.
Any other comments? Councillor Circus.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Following on from that and looking at what is stated in paragraph 411, I have to say, Horsham District, if we approve this, I think we can say that Horsham District Council must be one of the only groups in the whole of southern England that put any store by commitments and undertakings and guarantees given by Southern Water. You've only got to turn on the television, you've only got to listen to the radio, and you'll find that southern England is full of community groups, all of whom put no store on undertakings and commitments and guarantees by Southern Water. I just wanted to pick up on one of the points made by the officer. I think the officer said, if a local authority can't demonstrate a 5-year land supply, you should disregard neighbourhood plans. Is that what I heard? Is it true? Because if I can say this, if it is true, given that it can take, I don't know what the appeal times are now, but they used to be about a year, surely if there was an appeal against a refusal, by the time it comes to be heard by an inspector, presumably we will be much further down the line in terms of achieving a 5-year land supply. And also, I imagine in Pulborough, they may have had their referendum, and they will be much further down the line in terms of the endorsement of the draft neighbourhood plan that is being worked on in Pulborough. Perhaps the officers can comment on that and those questions. What I was struck with last time, and I remain struck by, is that I know, because of the effort parishes put into neighbourhood plans, that an awful lot of effort went into deciding what should be in the plan, what was suitable for development, and what wasn't suitable for development. And I am not convinced that it would be right to override that very carefully arrived at conclusion as part of the creation of the Pulborough neighbourhood plan in rejecting this particular site. It was considered in detail. But I wonder whether I could go back to the point about whether it is true to say that if you can't demonstrate a 5-year land supply, you can disregard neighbourhood plans. And if that is correct, what is the effect of waiting a year before it's heard by an inspector, in which case there'll be progress on the 5-year land supply and on the Pulborough neighbourhood plan? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis. I've got slight déjà vu with the question here. In terms of neighbourhood plans, that it's not disregarded, but you have to consider what weight the neighbourhood plan has, and the weight a neighbourhood plan depends on what stage of the neighbourhood plan's it at, whether it allocates development or not, and how old is a neighbourhood plan. They're all material to how much weight a neighbourhood plan has and where that sits with the tilted balance. So it's not disregarded, but it is set out within the National Planning Policy Statement in terms of what weights that has and whether the tilted balance applies. In this case, we have a 5-year, we have no 5-year housing land supply. We have a significant shortage at 3.9 years, 2.9 years, sorry. And therefore that carries significant weight. And because the neighbourhood plan is not made, it doesn't have full protection, unfortunately. You know, it's not a position as officers we want to be here saying this, because we recognise the work that's gone into the neighbourhood plan, but that is the national policy position, and we must be very, very mindful of that in our decision making. And it is not the case that you can just take a decision on the basis of what might happen in a number of months' time. You have to make your decision based on the current planning policy, on the status we are at on this very day in which we are considering this application. You can't make a decision on the basis of what might happen in 6 months' time. You know, we'd be in a very difficult position at cost set appeal if we took that kind of approach. Thank you.
No. How long, can I just ask, how long is it taking for appeals against, say, a refusal on this application to get decided by an inspector? And would it be true to say that if we had a hearing by the inspector and we then had a 5-year land supply and a local referendum had approved the Pulborough neighbourhood plan, that would profoundly change the situation? Am I right on that?
That's a lot of ifs, Councillor Serkis. I think, as I said, we have to take a decision on basis of where we are now. I think we can't be looking at what may or may happen in the future. With any decision, whether that's the inspector or committee or officers, you have to make a decision on the basis of what the policy circumstances are on the day you make a decision. So yes, that may change, but that's not how decision making and planning works. You have to make a decision on the basis of what the circumstances are on this day. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Lambert, but Councillor Bateman was first.
Yes, I'm just seeking clarification really on a figure that was just given with regards to the railway crossing. I thought I heard that you said 51 occupations out of the 65. I'm just wondering where that number's come from, because it sounds quite arbitrary and it represents almost the entire development.
That trigger is consistent with the neighbouring site in terms of the level of occupations and when the bridge would be delivered. So that was the basis on which that figure was derived from. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to clarify something in my head, because all the way through since 1819, when we've been working towards getting a new local plan, we have been told that once you start down that road, so you start working on your regulation 19, you show a direction of travel. The minute you vote on it, you show a stronger direction of travel. It's now been out to consultation and come back. Exactly what weight does that have? Because we showed a direction of travel, and we were told when we were working on the plan that if you've shown a direction of travel, an inspector has to take that into account, and you can use that to fight speculative development. Thank you.
And that's why obviously we want to progress local plan at pace. In terms of the status we're at now, in terms of the weight given, officers review, it's got low to moderate weight. Obviously, it does depend on the particular policies in terms of the weight that they have. What does carry significant weight is our significant lack of housing land supply. So, I think our view is we're not yet in a position where the progress of the local plan carries such sufficient weight, it could outweigh that significant shortfall in housing land supply. Obviously, that will come with time, but the officer's view is we're not at that point right now. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert, yes.
Thank you. However, the reason we don't have a 5-year housing land supply is not our fault. It's the fault of water neutrality. And when it goes to an inspector, he would have to take that into account, because the water that comes from mitigation strategy is for the local plan. It's not for speculative development.
The inspector on any individual planning application will not take into account the reasons for the delay in the local plan in their decision making, unfortunately. Thank you.
Did with land authorised.
Councillor Croke, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Sadly, I'm reverting to sewage here. I think that the 3 litre 0.65 is more to do with averages versus peak flows, so we'll ignore that for a minute. But I find myself having to agree with the parish council that, as they put it, sewerage is problematic in that area. Indeed, Southern Water themselves say that London Road tends to have hydraulic overload. Now, you might think that perhaps Southern Water are planning on doing something about this, but in terms of the sewage treatment plant for Poolborough, that is in their after 2030 bracket, which isn't that cheerful, and it's even less cheerful when you look at what they think is acceptable, which is less than 10 spills a year. Against that, I find myself somewhat conflicted, because I understand some of the planning arguments here. But I really find it very difficult to support this application purely on the sewage state. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Councillor Beard, and I'll come to you in a minute. Councillor Vane.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on water. I think we've taken water for granted for far too long. It's a precious resource for all of us, for all the beings that walk this earth. We turn on a tap and water runs. And water, basically, when raindrop falls, it falls into the earth, and it can take, certainly up in the Downs, the chalk, 30 years to get down to our aquifers. So I know we've had a lot of rain, but by tarmacking the surfaces, we are leading it all into the sewage, which is causing what everyone's talking about here, complete overrun of our systems, of which I am not yet convinced by any means that Southern Water have the capacity to deal with. And it's not, it's taking the rainwater into the systems, it's taking the pathogens, the micro plastics, which then goes into the system of all of our food chain, of the phytoplankton that give us our every second breath. So I'm really, I'm quite passionate about how we tend our rivers and our oceans and the waterways, and what we can do to enforce, to have enforcement on any building work that happens. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bainham.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I agree that we would be in a much stronger position if we did have we had a local plan in place already. Councillor Lambert suggests that's because of water neutrality, and we all actually know it's because of the failure of the last administration to agree a local plan.
Sorry.
Well,
what's your question, please?
I think so. Now, I regret I wasn't at the last committee meeting, but as I understand it, it was brought to this one to address 3 particular issues that run the sewage accessibility and the access to the A29. Now, those 3 issues have been addressed by the officers as we've heard. The issue of sewage is obviously very important, but I'm afraid that we're not in a position to overrule what the experts in this area have said, which is, and the only experts we can rely on is the information given us by Southern Water. The result of that is that if we vote against this proposal, it will inevitably go to appeal, which we will inevitably lose. Plus, we will be stuck with the costs of that appeal process as well. So I just ask people to be wary of, voting for something that is very unlikely to be upheld.
Thank you. Although there was a large assumption there. Thank you. Councillor Manton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel that I can perhaps talk on this subject because only been elected in May of last year. I wasn't here at the time that the proposed local plan didn't go through. But my clear understanding is that the previous administration's local plan was in fact voted down as being unsuitable in some ways. I'm not clear of the detail.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there, please? The previous administration and their decision on what the local plan is not material to this decision we're discussing this evening. There are 3 points we are discussing which will be deferred from the previous meeting. And I would encourage members. I brought Mr. Councillor Bainham to order. Okay, the previous administration and what their decision was around the local plan is not material to this decision, as I have been advised. So therefore, please could you remain on your questions regarding the 3 areas that we were asked to defer this application for previously.
Okay, I apologise, sir. As I say, I'm new to this in some ways, and I apologise.
Any other points you want to raise?
Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I saw. Councillor Lambert, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I still say the reason that we have a low housing number supply is the fact that since September 2021, when we had the position statement, we were not allowed to build. Natural England stopped it.
Sorry, can we just defer from making reference to the local plan, in that we don't have one, or one that we didn't vote for previously, and stick to the 3 elements? Right. Sorry, Councillor Vanderbilt.
Thank you. There must be a body out there that could independently have a look at the sewage issue. There appears to be enough scepticism about Southern Water, and I think that's probably quite founded given what we read. I'm not proposing another deferral here. I'm just curious as to whether or not there is any independent work that's been done on this, and whether or not there is a body that could have a look at it independently.
I think we just have to bear in mind that Southern Water are a statutory consultee. Whilst I hear what you say, Councillor Vanderberg, members didn't request that at the previous meeting, and obviously that was open to members. I think it would be very difficult to find an independent body to comment on that, but I think we have to be mindful that the application's been deferred once for specific reasons. It's taken time to investigate that and come back, and I really do feel members need to make a decision on the basis of the information that you have before you today. Thank you.
Councillor Trollope.
Is it possible in the planning process that we could have some sort of future condition in the sense that if we were to accept the proposal, but then we were to see that there were severe sewage issues in the future, what could be put in place in paper now to ensure that there would be a remedy?
It's not possible to kind of retrospectively add conditions on, or add conditions on in the event something may or may not happen. We have got conditions proposed, which my colleague is just checking in terms of what we've got on. So we do generally have conditions around drainage, and if you just give us a minute, we can come back with you and confirm what is recommended as part of the officer's report. Thank you.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you, officer.
Apologies. We have got condition 10, but that mainly relates to surface water drainage. Obviously, if members are particularly concerned about foul drainage, it could be possible to extend that condition to include foul and surface drainage to ensure details are submitted for us to consider. Thank you.
Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question to follow up on Councillor Bateman's comment earlier about the preoccupation of, I think it was about 50, and that being equal to the other side. Is that as a percentage or as an absolute number? Because it does seem a very high percentage of this application. Thank you.
It is an absolute number. It's not a percentage. It was just to provide consistency with the other application. That was the reason why that trigger was considered reasonable. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Marks.
Going slightly off topic here, about just looking at the affordable housing mix, I've noticed, this might be relevant to future applications, the council requires that 35% of dwellings be affordable. I'm just noting that although 23 units out of the 65 are affordable, 10 of those are just one bed flats. So, not really, in terms of occupancy, you're not looking at 35% occupancy at an affordable level. It's effectively weighting that affordability towards cheaper and perhaps more useless types of accommodations, such as one bed flats, as opposed to perhaps the 3-bed houses, which the council might be wanting to build in order to attract families to the area. So I'd like to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do consult our housing colleagues who do have a look at planning applications to look at that mix and whether that's appropriate to meet our needs. There is at 3.7, it says HDC housing, no objection. So they do, and we do have discussions with our housing officers and negotiate with developers where we feel those mixes need to change. Thank you.
Just come back finally to the ward councillors. Councillor Clark, do you have anything final to say on this application?
No, Chairman, thank you. I said it, unless officers that would consider a Grampian condition on the development, as I explained earlier on.
I think it secures it in a section 106, which is stronger than a planning condition. So obviously the officers of view are to have a trigger in a legal agreement. Now we can make that explicit in the minutes in terms of that's the basis in which you're making a decision, I'm sure. But obviously, and as I said, that figure of 51 was based on consistency with the neighbouring site. Obviously, if we've got an evidence base that demonstrates it should be something different, then that's something that members can consider. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, if I can go back. The issue is, though, is the other development is 170 houses, so 50 and 170. This is 60-something houses, so 50 and 65. The proportions are somewhat wrong. So if the one that went for a Grampian condition, it wouldn't be 50 up, it wouldn't be 50 completions, it would be a third.
as I said, I think it's open to members to consider. I think officers have stated a position, but I think it's difficult to come to a different figure with an evidence base. But obviously that's something members could consider in terms of, well, is that before any occupation or not? The alternative is to delegate approval subject to further discussion with Network Rail, but obviously we have consulted them a number of times. You can see there's about 4 sets of comments in the report, and at no point have they said there should be no occupation, but ultimately that decision is for you members. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Nothing more from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Now move to vote on this. The recommendation is to approve outline planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and the completion of a section 106 legal agreement. All those for in favour of the recommendation, please show.
That is,
Sorry, I'm checking.
that is 6-4.
Okay. All those against?
That is 8 against.
Any abstentions? 3 abstentions.
And 3 abstentions.
Okay, so that recommendation, we now need an alternative motion.
Members, so obviously the motion as printed has failed, so it's now for members to consider what the decision should be on it. That doesn't make a decision. So the options open to members, well, my opinion is the options open to members are obviously to refuse the application, but you would have to substantiate that reason for refusal with evidence that can stand up. Or there's an alternative motions around, would some changes to the conditions, for instance, address the concerns that have been raised, and that could be an option for an alternative motion. And obviously I've listened to debate some of the options were around foul drainage or the number of dwellings which would be occupied before the bridge or the stoplights were in place. So that's some of the comments that have been made within the debate, and I'd ask members to think about if those changes were made, would you therefore be satisfied with the application or not? Could changes occur that you would consider acceptable? Thank you.
Sorry, Peter. Councillor van der Burg.
Yeah, I think one thing we could contemplate here is applying the same percentage as in the other development. So I think it's whatever it was, 51 out of 170, so that's 28% or something like that. So if you could apply that to the 65. That sort of addresses that issue to some degree. I'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark.
Another option is that it has been demonstrated quite plainly that the downstream sewage system cannot cope. It's under dynamic stress, as has been quoted very clearly. I've never seen it done before, but I'm sure the head of development can point me in the right direction or correct me if I'm wrong, is that we could permit this development on the condition that Southern Water put in development works at the waste treatment water plant such that it would not increase the SSOs on the site. And I don't know if that's feasible or not, or bring forward investment on the plant.
You would only generally put those kind of Grampian conditions on if it's a request from that infrastructure undertaker. I think the difficulty in this case is you've got no objections from Southern Water, So I think you'd be hard pressed because they might not ever do it, and you can't really put requirements on a developer relating to what a third party may or may not do. It's not really reasonable. I think an alternative to that is to have some kind of condition around a frail drainage strategy to be submitted by condition that then the council can consider. I think that would be a more appropriate option, which would be a more reasonable approach. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
My main concern, as I've explained, is basically that we have a situation where sewage has been consistently dumped into the river. And my concern is that adding more houses at the moment just makes that situation worse. Particularly if you look at climate change and the amount of rain that we're getting dumped on that's finding its way into the sewage system. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with this planning application if it could be found some way that would not get worse, is where I'm going with it. And that's what I'm grasping for.
I think we're also in danger of the development trying to mitigate pre-existing, which councillors consider are pre-existing issues. I think, as I said, I think without the support of Southern Water in terms of that being a requirement to make the development acceptable, I just don't think that would meet the test of reasonableness. And I think, as I said, I as an alternative, I would suggest a condition. Thank you.
I think to add to that, Chair, I think that if they appealed that condition, as we have no alternative evidence, strong evidence, then it would fail the test of necessity.
Could that be clarified, please? Because Southern Water have clearly said there is a state of dynamic stress in the system, so I don't get it.
Sorry, Councillor Circus, that you can't have the notes passed from the public. Sorry. So I interrupted you, Councillor Clark.
I was just asking our legal officer to clarify a bit, because Southern Water has said there is a dynamic stress in the situation. In other words, the system can't cope. So I don't get the point.
They don't accept it doesn't cope. And I think
But they said it.
They're not asking us to impose conditions to mitigate the development. I think that's the key.
We do need substantiate the reason for voting against the recommendation.
I think, Councillor Finnegan's got a hand up.
Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be more likely to vote for this application with some of the points that have been raised by the head of it. For example, the sort of 28%, and I think you mentioned the groundwater as well as the sewage water mentioned in some of the conditions as well. But I think it was the gentleman from the parish council who, sorry, excuse me if I got it wrong, it was a little bit technical, mentioned that Southern Water are using averages rather than the actual numbers that they might have. Could we ask for that calculation to be updated based on the actual?
It is open to members to defer this again, but I think my view is it's been deferred once. You know, we do have a duty to make timely decisions. Obviously, you know, we've spent some time looking at the points that have been raised. If members required specific or different information, that should have been raised at the last committee, and obviously we could have taken time to consider that. I would really encourage members to make a decision today. I know it's challenging, but I would really encourage you to make a decision again. I think it's not particularly reasonable to defer for a second time when that's information that you could have asked for last time. I appreciate new thoughts come to you, but I think we just need to be mindful that we do need to, in my view, we need to make a decision. Obviously that decision rests with you members, but that's my professional advice. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Emma. So, but could we defer it and ask for a an expert drainage engineer to look at what we've been told and tell us whether or not what Southern Water are saying is correct and what their advice would be?
I think it goes back to what Councillor Finnegan said. The same comments applies. You know, if members really felt you don't have sufficient information, that is a decision open to you, but I just don't think it's a particularly reasonable one, because it could have been requests that were raised at the last meeting, and I think to defer it for a second time, I don't think is particularly reasonable, but ultimately I'm not making the decision. That's for you members. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert, yes.
Yes, thank you, but I suppose it was only, I think it was you said something about, we're not drainage engineers. And I thought then, why haven't we asked the drainage engineer? I didn't think about it last time because I didn't know we wouldn't.
Just to clarify, we have consulted with any major scheme, we consult the lead local flood authority, which is West Sussex County Council. So a drainage engineer has been consulted on the development. So just to make that clear, there is professional expertise that have gone into the decision-making process there. Thank you.
Councillor Trollope, yes.
Thank you. I don't know if we have an option, a third option, which is doing the vote again. And it's very simply because I think we will lose on appeal. I don't think we have stated a strong enough case which follows planning law, as we're all learning, well, as I'm learning it since May, that you can't vote with your heart. And I don't think, I don't feel great about this application, but I do feel like it's at least technically ticks all the boxes in terms of planning, and that we really don't have a choice. I might be wrong, but that's my personal feeling, and I don't know if there's if we can't come up with a reasonable alternative, can we just go backwards in time and vote again?
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, Councillor Trollope, we can't go back and do the vote as printed, but obviously some alternatives have been put forward, and Councillor Finnegan commented on, and Councillor Vanderberg, in terms of looking at a different trigger for when the crossing measures, whether the bridge or the traffic lights come into effect. So making that the same as the other development, so a third, that's a reasonable alternative members can consider. And the other point is around foul drainage and securing that by condition. It is open to members to suggest that as an alternative motion, but somebody does need to suggest it, so we can then progress to that vote if that's how if somebody wishes for that to move forward. Thank you.
Somebody wish to put that motion forward? Oh, Peter Vanderberg, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to put that forward, please, on those 2 points. I only did the 28% in my head, so I'm not a great mathematician, so we better calculate that. And also there was an amendment to the condition to do with drainage that would be helpful, I think.
Okay, we need to capture the wording of...
Yeah, so perhaps you can work out the wording for us and read it back to us, please, or along the lines of what I've said.
Thank you.
Okay. I think so. My understanding, Councillor Vanderberg, is we make it a third in terms of what the trigger is.
30% or
30%. Okay, Councillor Clark, if you're happy with 30%, Councillor Vanderberg. And then condition 10 is changed to include foul and surface water. So is that my understanding of your motion, Councillor Vanderberg?
That's your correct understanding of my motion, yes.
Thank you. So that would need to be seconded.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favour of that motion? Sorry.
That was 9-4.
Those against? Okay. Any
One against.
abstentions?
And 6 abstentions.
The alternative motion is carried. So that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now take a short break.
When we're ready, ladies and gentlemen. Could any members with an interest who do want to leave the room now? Thank you. This is item 7, DC 231631, Peacock's Paddock, Stallhouse Lane, North East. Could the officer present the application to committee, please?
Okay, thank you. So this is an application to remove and vary conditions attached to a previous permission for this site at Peacock's Paddock. The previous permission under DC 230185 was to retain an agricultural building and extended hard standing on the site, and was granted in June 2023. The proposal today seeks to remove conditions 3 and 4 and vary condition 2 of that permission. So here we see the location plan with the site highlighted in red. Site relates to an agricultural small holding located on the northwestern side of Stallhouse Lane. The site is mostly laid to grass with a hard standing caravan and a barn on site. The site is located at North Heath, north of Pulborough and east of Stane Street. There is a listed building sited to the south of the site, and a public right-of-way is adjacent to the site to the east. Here we see the block plan shows the access to the site and position of the agricultural barn near the road. The site includes fencing around the site and the caravan located further within the site, which you can see there. And this was the layout as approved under DC 230185. So this plan shows the approved elevations of the timber barn with the 3 open sides. So the barn is now in place, as you can see here, with the photographs of the site. This also shows the fencing, the open sides of the barn, and the view from the street. So there's 3 aspects to this application to vary remove condition. The first relates to condition 2. This is the original wording of the condition, which restricts the use of the development to storage of hay, straw, animal feed, farming equipment, and the temporary housing of livestock between March and June. The wording of the condition is very specific, and the applicant is seeking to vary the wording to allow greater flexibility with the use of the barn. Officers agree that greater flexibility could be applied to the condition to enable an ad hoc welfare use, provided that the use remains agricultural and that the variation would not give rise to increased water use. This is considered the case as the proposal does not increase the capacity of the holding. Officers are proposing alternative wording to the applicant to enable more flexible use as seen here. This limits the use of the barn solely for agricultural purposes for Peacock's Paddock site only. The next amendment is condition 3. The applicant is seeking to remove the time condition, which requires the submission of a lighting scheme, as you can see here. And this is the original details, as outlined in the report. Planning and Environmental Health officers attended a visit to the site in November 2023, where the lighting was inspected during daylight and evening hours. The lights installed, both internally and externally, were observed to be domestic units that would typically be found to and attached to within a dwelling. You can see the lighting in place here in these photos. Given the relatively low level of lighting currently present at the site, which is considered reasonable for its agricultural purposes, officers are satisfied that lighting does not result in adverse harm by the way of light spill to neighbouring properties or the wider landscapes, especially considering the wider presence of residential units on Stallhouse Lane. However, officers don't agree to removal of condition as applied for by the applicant. To retain appropriate lighting on the site, a variation to the wording of the condition is proposed, as shown here. This would retain the lighting on site as currently installed and would require any replacement lighting to be of the same specification. Finally, the applicant is seeking to remove condition 4. This is in relation to details of animal waste to be submitted for approval and thereafter retained. As outlined in the report, condition 4 was attached to permission during the committee debate by councillors when considering the previous application. Following this, at the visit of the site in November 2023, it was agreed that a muck heap would not typically be expected for animals kept on site, which are sheep and pigs. Sheep waste is typically left on the site and returned to the earth, and pig waste is managed and removed from the site for welfare purposes. Muck heaps are typically used for non-agrarian animals such as horses, which are not present here. Given the small scale of the agricultural holding and the type of animals using the site, officers agreed that the condition is not necessary and could be removed from the consent. The proposal is therefore recommended based on the variations from conditions 2 and 3 relating to the use of the barn and lighting, as I've outlined earlier, and the removal of condition 4 relating to animal waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Could the speakers please come forward? Our first speaker is Titania Milne-Skillman. And you have a total of 6 minutes. I understand you'll be reading 3 different sets of objections. Is that right?
It's actually representing 7 households. Dear members, this is a Section 73 application to amend or vary the conditions to this retrospective permission. Planning laws and regulations are there to serve the interest of both the applicant and neighbouring property. Had the applicant followed the law, many of the issues, if not all, would have been addressed beforehand and safeguarded both the applicant and the objectors. It's the disregard for the law and lack of consideration for the neighbouring properties by the applicant why we are here at committee today. Section 73 allows for a variation in the conditions, but, and this is an important point, it also allows for additional conditions and in effect allows the councillors a new opportunity to address the issues that this retrospective permission raises. We would like to point out the various inaccuracies and misrepresentations which were raised and seemingly ignored by the officers at the initial application. Photographic evidence has been sent to councillors showing clearly the issues that need addressing regarding the removal of hedges, placement of hardstanding and consequently flooding issues on Storehouse Lane and in Peacock's Paddock. The application was for extended hardstanding and a barn. The officers failed to acknowledge the fact that there was no existing hardstanding to extend. I have photos, if I may distribute these in a minute for you to inspect. It is our belief the Peacocks illegally removed a protected hedge according to the Hedges Regulation Act 1997. They removed this hedge in March 2021 to gain access to put down hardstanding and build the barn without permission. The removal of a protected hedge requires in law to be made good and or to be given a fine. The building works resulted in hardstanding well in excess of 5 square metres, which in law requires a drainage plan. Badly planned building works exacerbate flooding since it creates an excess of surface water. Add to this the removal of a protected hedge, adding further to the problem of surface water and flooding, clearly shown by the photographs. Another issue upon which the officers did not pick up and was a misrepresentation by the applicant is the acreage. Peacock's Paddock is not 4, but closer to 2.5 acres as per the filings at the land registry. The barn and large area of hardstanding reduce the actual amount of grazing to a fairly small amount of land. The number of animals grazing the land, trampling down and compacting such a small piece of land, adds again to surface water and subsequent flooding. There are numerous properties close to Peacock Paddock that on rainy days have to deal with animal feces floating into their gardens where children are supposed to be able to play. This is dangerous and irresponsible. The members cannot expect us, the neighbouring properties, to contact environmental health and to police these issues on an ad hoc basis. As nearby households, we have observed that the number of animals have decreased during the time where this application has been active. This could be coincidental. However, with the site being under inspection, the sudden drop in numbers could give a false impression to officers. This was evidenced by the U-turn advice from the Environmental Health Officer, Lee Money. Nothing has changed since the retrospective application passed. Laurel Cottage sits at 20 metres and Woodside at 70 metres. As mentioned before, we are here for a Section 73 application, which allows you, the councillors, to look after the neighbouring properties that are having to deal with the consequences of a retrospective permission through conditions either as existing and or adding. And we therefore implore you to consider the following conditions. A requirement for a drainage plan to address the extra surface water created by the building of the barn and putting down of hardstanding.
A requirement for hedging to be planted along the perimeters and to make good the illegal destruction of the protected hedge. A requirement for a waste removal system in place due to the proximity to residential homes. A limit to the number of animals kept on such a small plot so close to residential homes. The removal of all permitted development rights to avoid any further intensification. This concerns children that would like to play in their garden safely, and we feel very strongly about these issues and will pursue the matter further if necessary.
Thank you. No, you can't distribute anything at this page, but thank you.
Then I hope that the councillor saw my email.
I'd like to see photos if possible.
Oh, yeah, you can see it.
Right. Can we have the next speaker, please? Who is it? The next speaker is Gemma Peacock. Gemma, we're going to ask you to stop every 2 minutes, but it's fine. No, we're not going to ask you to do that now because Titania spoke through, so we carry on.
Okay. As you know, I'm Gemma. I own Peacock's Paddock with my husband Tony and our 2 teenage daughters Casey and Willow. Speak and stand on behalf of myself and 2 other supporters who sadly cannot be here to speak in person. Since our last committee meeting on the 20th of June last year, a lot has happened and we feel it is essential to give everybody here this evening a clear and concise account of our findings and what has been done since the 20th of June in order for you all to make your vote today based on facts. As you'll remember, we were elated to be awarded planning permission for our essential agricultural barn. However, we were left disgruntled and confused by the 3 conditions that were placed upon our small holding. These conditions were added due to the onslaught of false allegations, lies, and a falsified report by a company called Environmental Assessment Services Limited, based in Henfield. This report states that they visited the site on the 14th of June and used information provided by the site neighbours in order to gather evidence. 14th of June, luckily, happens to be our wedding anniversary, and we chose to spend the day at our small holding in the sunshine. We saw no one, and we also have CCTV footage which records 24/7, so we can confirm that no site visit was ever conducted by Environmental Assessment Services or any other independent body on the 14th of June or any other day. We do have legal representatives looking into this false report done by the company. The carefully written report was commissioned by the same neighbours who were responsible for the objections, which painted our small holding as a disgusting, foul, polluted, over-farmed site, which was causing a huge amount of distress on the neighbouring properties, who supposedly couldn't even walk past their gates due to fear of vermin and flies. Noise was raised as an issue, as well as our lighting, which was supposedly imposing on neighbouring properties, and one objection even stated that our light pollution could be seen from the A29. It was impossible for the council to ignore these allegations when the allegations were supposedly coming from properties as far away as Lancing. We are aware that the final blow for us, though, was the report by Environmental Assessment Services Limited. This report appeared to be legitimate and independent, so giving the council no choice but to add these conditions, so to protect our neighbours. However, this report was only submitted for consideration to the planning department on the morning of the 20th of June, which was the very same day as our committee meeting. This was not sufficient time for planning officers to use this report as evidence. We feel this late submission was yet another strategic move by our objectors, and we feel unfair as it did not allow any time for us to disprove the information provided in the report. Sadly, despite us asking, we had not been able to get a site visit with our case officer and an HDC environmental officer prior to our committee meeting on the 20th of June. Had this have happened before the 20th of June, I feel we may have been spared these 9 months of stress, and HDC would not be wasting precious time and money dealing with this instead of more pressing issues. Fast forward to January just gone. After speaking with Robert Hermitage over the phone many times, and letting him know the stress, the lies and accusations were having on my health, he finally agreed to visit myself and Tony at Peacock's Paddock, along with the environmental officer Lee Money. At this meeting, we discussed the cause for the conditions in detail. Tony and I showed photograph and video evidence of our progress and the huge amount of work we have put in to improve the health and functionality of the land. We showed the bird houses, newly planted trees, additional hedgerows. Everything we do has the welfare of our animals, nature, neighbours and wildlife in mind, along with drainage improvements, which we have done. This meeting was access all areas, no door was locked, and we had the meeting at the end of the day so that Rob and Lee could see our lighting as it got dark, which is all censored, low wattage and solar where possible. It very quickly became clear to Lee and Rob that the accusations and objections were based on lies and fabricated issues. We even walked the length of Storehouse Lane to show how our ditches and hedgerows lie and the improvements we have made, and even how we have 6 ewes in our neighbour's paddock at Laurel Cottage, who we actually get on with pretty well. We walked the boundary of our land so Rob and Lee could make their decision based on the reality. All we ask is to be treated fairly and that we are to be seen for who we are and not what a few people have chosen to paint us to be. We cannot fathom why these neighbours have gone to such lengths to target us. We have sadly learned that they have taken such a dim view, though, based solely on our family's heritage and the deeply knit prejudice and racial stereotype assumptions. We wish to be seen today for who we are, not who people assume we will be. Lee Money suggested that if this application come to committee, councillors should visit the site, and I quote his words, "What is written on paper is much different to reality." We really hoped to meet many of you in the lead up to this meeting, so that you could meet us at our small holding, but we haven't had any contact, so I'm really hoping that maybe you had time at least to do a drive-by and see for yourself, as it really is a beautiful little plot that we are incredibly proud to own. After much discussion with Rob Hermitage, I just want to say we are now content with the amended conditions. We feel we have reached a fair compromise and really hope that today this is the end of this chapter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, officers, are there any points you'd like to raise?
To clarify that, yes, it is a section 73 application, which is to amend various conditions, and councillors can add conditions to that, that is allowed, but they have to be reasonable. They also have to meet the 6 test as whether they're necessary, relevant and enforceable. And that has to be based on, is there sufficient evidence before you, for example, to add a drainage condition? And from our point of view as officers, we don't feel that there's enough evidence before us to say that that's warranted at this stage. I mean, yes, there is going to be some flooding for an agricultural use, but is that above and beyond what would be normal for a farm of this size? But that's, again, the councillors can add that condition, but again, it has to meet the 6 tests and be reasonable. For hedging, not unless it's protected by a tree preservation order, which hedges aren't. Hedges can be removed, and it does happen on sites often that landscaping is removed prior to applications being submitted, for example, and there's nothing to stop that happening, I'm afraid. In terms of what we're looking at today, there has been a site visit with the environmental health officer, and we feel that the variations that we're putting forward to you today are reasonable and meet the planning merits and taking into account all the objections we've received. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I now invite the local board members to speak? Councillor Campbell?
I just want to clarify something. We are purely considering the amendments to the conditions. And
With any amendment application, you would consider what those changes are, but you would also need to consider, has there been any change in planning policy or site circumstances that would bring you to a different view? So generally it's the amendments, but we have to be mindful if anything in policy terms or any, changes in the site that would mean you would come to a different view. But we do need to be consistent in our decision making. Thank you.
okay, in that case, I've obviously read the papers, and I'm fairly happy with the amendments put forward by officers.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like some clarifications on the conditions. My first question is, when looking at condition 2, Can officers confirm that agricultural use does not include things like slaughter, processing, butchering of animals and this sort of thing? So that's the first question.
Generally no, but we need to be mindful of what a primary use is, and if a small element of any different use takes place, it might be ancillary or it might not be sufficient to warrant planning permission. But if such an activity became a primary use of the building, then yes, it would require a change of use because it would become a commercial activity. But if members are particularly concerned about that is something that we could consider as part of that condition.
So if I can come back, I mean, my main concern is because this is a retrospective planning permission that would normally not have been permitted in the location where it is, the proximity of the barn to other buildings and habitation means that that sort of activity particularly would attract vermin and flies and stuff. So one would want to be quite strict in interpretation. So yeah, greater flexibility within reason, but not absolute flexibility. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. So just looking at the condition again, because it says and shall not be used for any commercial or domestic purposes, my view is obviously if it was used for the selling of meat or something like that as a primary use, then it would be in conflict with that condition. Thank you.
Just to clarify, I'm not saying the selling of meat, I'm saying the butchering and slaughter. That's what I'm talking about.
That will never happen, just for clarification.
I think, well, I haven't got my use classes order in front of me. In terms of what use class that is, it might be different from agriculture and therefore it might be acceptable in other respects. But I think if members are particularly concerned about that, I see no reason why that can't be added explicitly within the condition.
Thank you. Second point on the condition, basically removal of condition 3. I'd like to propose a slight modification to the proposed condition, which basically says that any replacement lighting shall be similar specification to that of existing lighting. Whereas the lighting on the inside of the shed, I can understand that people need light to see what they're doing at night, and when tending to animals, I get that, and but outside lights really should have sensors on them to make sure that they turn off. I mean, that is normal, especially in a dark area like that. And I just want to make sure that the condition makes that clear or is tight enough on that. So, for the outside lights, because if you look at the photograph that you put up, the outside light is quite bright in that context because it's a very dark area, basically. I know some of the houses, it will argue, and the lawyers argued that some of the houses had outside lights, but actually those outside lights, like most houses, have got timers on them or things that turn them off so they don't stay on all night. Can you sort of clarify?
So I'm just trying to clarify. I think in the report it does say the internal lights have sensors, but I'm afraid there's nothing here to clarify whether the external lights do.
Sorry, can I just butt in there? Unfortunately, we can't have members of the public speaking. I do understand that, unfortunately, although this is a public meeting, it's not a meeting for the public. Thank you.
Well, if they have sensors, then we can say.
Yeah, you can. Well, we can indeed amend the condition to make that clear. We can include that in the wording.
That's fine by me.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Can I open this up? Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, what would happen if horses were kept there? Would that require a change of permission?
Yes, because it's not an agricultural use, it's an equestrian use.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, just following up Councillor Clark's point about sensors, I think the point is they need to be on timers. for, rather than sensing. So if the officer could make a note of that.
I think, can I just say, if there are obviously details about that, we can't engage the public, as you know, it might be better to delegate approval subject to the final wording of these conditions, because ultimately what the applicants are seeking is that we approve the details of the lighting on site. I think if the lighting is not what members want, then I think that's something we need to be mindful of. But I think that engagement would have to sit outside of this committee debate. So if members are particularly concerned about elements, are they turned off or are they sensors, etc., I think we can have those discussions with the applicant as part of a delegation in consultation with members if that's what you wish. But I think I think it's difficult to establish the fine detail of a condition if you're seeking to change it from what's printed. Thank you.
Thank you. So, are we ready to vote on this?
Yes.
Councillor Circus.
The suggestion about a delegate, that it's dealt with on the actual wording of the revised wording of the conditions is dealt with on a delegated basis. Can I take it that will include involvement by ward members?
Depends what your members' alternative motion is, Councillor Circus. It's open to members to include that within any delegation. There would have to be an alternative motion to delegate approval subject to changes to the conditions, which can be in consultation with local members. So if members wish that to happen, then that would need to be the motion. Thank you.
Right, can I propose that?
Yes, certainly.
I propose that, what am I proposing? The acceptance of the application subject to the conditions that there will be a delegation to deal with rewording to take account of the lighting issue and the issue of no butchering or slaughtering. I think those are the two issues that were raised, and that will take place, that will involve a consultation with ward members.
You can. I'd like to suggest a slight amendment to that, because with livestock, if there is any illness and you do need to put an animal down, then you want to do that as quickly as possible. So I would be I personally would feel that removing the opportunity to do that on site would be an issue.
A legal officer can give us advice on whether a no butchering or slaughtering condition would affect having to put down an animal in the ordinary course of events because of ill health.
Yes. If I can. Yes. I think that's why it's best to consider this as part of the conditions, because a quick look, I think butchery itself is a different use class to agriculture anyway, and therefore I think you're right, Councillor Circus, if you're putting down an animal, it's likely to be agricultural. If it was some kind of butchery activity, it's likely to be a change of use already secured by the condition. But I think we just need to research that and discuss that as part of the delegation. So I think the principles to investigate how you would deal with butchery and lighting is probably more appropriate wording for a deferral, for a delegation, and then we can finalise that wording. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Manton.
Can I second the proposal from Councillor Circus?
Seconded. So, shall we go to a vote on this proposal? All those in favour?
That is, 13 for.
Against?
And 1 against. And no abstentions.
So that motion is carried. Thank you. There'll just be a small delay while the other councillors return to the room.
turn my microphone on. Yeah, I said, can you hear me in the back? And I think Councillor Circus said, unfortunately, yes. Okay, so this is DC 21 2802 Eversworth Cottage, the street Nutbourne. Okay, just get my notes. So could the officer please present the application to committee?
Thank you. So this was a deferred application for a two-bed annex building providing ancillary residential accommodation in place of a previously demolished annex building. It was deferred from committee in October for following reasons: seek further information relating to the baseline of the existing dwelling for the purposes of demonstrating water neutrality, to review the rainwater harvesting storage tank capacity and location, to seek further information relating to slab foundation construction, to seek the inclusion of leaded windows to the annex, and to seek clarification of the ridge height compared to the previous building on the site. So just to refresh the councillors, here we see the application site. Application site relates to a grade 2 listed two-storey building located to the north of the street in Nutbourne. The application is located within Nutbourne Conservation Area, as you can see here. This also indicates other listed buildings, and you can see the location of the annex there. So here we see the position of the proposed annex to the east of the main cottage. And this shows the previous annex in much need of repair, which is now being demolished. So here we see the existing proposed annexes. So you've got the existing there and the proposed. You can see they're similar in scale, height and design. So in relation to the slab level reason for deferral, technical details of the slab construction have now been submitted, as shown here. This is quite a technical plan, I'm aware. Details illustrate that the foundation has been constructed using a raft foundation design, and the council's building control team manager has reviewed the technical drawings and advised this design would be expected from a structural engineer and is acceptable. In terms of the windows, revised details have been submitted which indicated leaded windows to the annex. Here we see photographs of the existing windows within the main dwellings, and the proposed windows for the annex will match those on the existing cottage. Proposed condition 10 has been updated to incorporate this detail within its wording. Okay, so for clarification of the ridge heights, the annex building, both as pre-existing proposed, is constructed of two sections, and you can see the existing proposed here, with the southernmost portion of the building comprising a higher ridge height. The higher portion of the new annex would stand 5.5 metres as per the existing structure, and the northern part of the annex would be raised by 0.9 metres from the pre-existing structure as shown here, which is a minor increase. Both roofs would incorporate a pitch roof as per the existing pre-existing arrangement. And this plan here also shows the existing proposed with the existing shown in the red there and the overlay of the proposed. You can see the similarities in height with that slight increase there. So finally, for the water neutrality, an updated water neutrality statement has been received. Proposed annex would include 2 guest bedrooms and a bathroom area, seen here. The statement details that through the use of rainwater harvesting and efficiency measures within the proposed annex, the water demand for the new annex could be reduced to 63.57 litres per day. The applicant has provided more detailed evidence relating to the baseline use as requested of the existing dwelling, and has included the necessary rainwater harvesting storage tank capacity. Oh, that's a mouthful. So the rainwater harvesting tank will need to be 1,700 litres to be located in a water butt, and this would ideally be underground to reduce the impact on the listed building. Exact details on the location of the tank are to be supplied by way of a recommended condition. Mitigation measures are also proposed to the annex and to the main building to reduce the water down to an acceptable level. Thank you.
Thank you. Invite Frank Riddle to speak, and remind you, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, councillors and Horsham District Council. I speak on behalf of the Nutbourne Conservation History Group and the Nutbourne Residents Association. We have discussed this matter in depth. I have known Nutbourne very well since 1958 and lived here for the last 30 years. I have a good historical knowledge of the hamlet and regarding Ebsworth, have met all the occupants who have lived there since 1920. At the request of Horsham District Council, the Nutbourne Conservation History Group, which I led, carried out the work to produce the Nutbourne VDS, so as to, amongst other things, to preserve the historic buildings and their setting, particularly in the conservation area. Ebsworth is a very important ancient building, but as many of you may know, has recently suffered badly from thatch being replaced by tiles, and the unlawful demolition of the ancient listed outbuilding has added to this. We understand this is a criminal offence. As far as the listed building now demolished without permission is concerned, it is shown on maps dating back to 1800, but was never proper living accommodation and functioned only as a workshop and garden room with an attached shed in the 1970s with black feather edge boarding to match the appearance of the listed building. We object to it becoming a two-bedroom annex as there is not enough parking for the increased accommodation, and hereby request it is rebuilt as it was, that being a timber-clad oak frame garden building on a stone plinth of about 18 inches to 24 inches. The shed should also be rebuilt in the same style as the garden room workshop. Every such house will need a shed, and this should be maintained, otherwise another shed will be required. Roof tiles should be proper handmade tiles and not the approved ones for the cottage, which are modern, formal, and not proper fully handmade tiles.
Mr. Riddle, could I ask you?
Yeah, on one line, we hope it can be rebuilt to the same style and use as it was before it was demolished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe Graham Wagland is going to read something on behalf of Ewan Clark, who couldn't make it this evening.
Hi there. Ewan sends his apologies, he's bedridden at the moment. We've been asked to represent by the applicant to speak on their behalf. We understand that the proposed development has both the support of the Horsham District Council Planning Officer and Conservation Officer and has been recommended for approval by this committee. The proposal is for the construction of a replacement residential annex in the grounds of the Grade 2 Ebsworth Cottage. The intended use of the annex is to provide ancillary accommodation for Ebsworth Cottage for infrequent guest accommodation and therefore has not been designated to be self-contained. Therefore, relying on the main house for kitchen facilities, but does include a modest shower room for the infrequent occupants of the annex. At the previous committee meeting in October 2023, this committee requested additional information in the form of a site section and window details, which have both been provided to the council and accepted by the case officer. The proposed windows in the annex are to include leaded lights as specifically requested by this committee, and commitment to this has been shown through the inclusion of details regarding timber casements and leaded lights. Concerns were raised about the water neutrality statement, even though it had been approved by Natural England and Horsham District Council. The water neutrality statement has since been updated to reflect the comments made by the committee regarding the calculation of the baseline water usage and proposed usage. The updated calculations concluded that the residual water usage for the proposed development is 37.81 litres per day due to the water saving measures made through the retrofit works to the cottage and the use of rainwater harvesting tank. Therefore, the development is deemed as water neutral. As the applicant has addressed all the concerns raised by the committee and worked positively with the planning officers, we ask that this committee approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to point out that if you look at the previous reports for the committee, there's quite a big section there on design with that was been thoroughly assessed with no objections from our conservation officer, and that is subject to one of the conditions is about materials, so specifications to be submitted. So I think that's quite a strong consideration here. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Invite the local ward councillors. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Campbell comes before Clark, but never mind. I don't really have any comments because a lot of the points have been addressed since the last meeting. All I would say is I particularly welcome the inclusion of the second paragraph in the second section in paragraph 3.5 because whilst normally the storage tank and where the rainwater harvesting tank would go normally is not a problem, in this case, this is a listed building. It's a listed building that has suffered a lot of harm. It's a listed building that has also been subject to a planning appeal, and the planning appeal was rejected because of harm to the building. So I'm very glad to see that officers would manage to make sure that the rainwater harvesting tank will be placed in a position that will not will not impact on the building, and I'm glad of that. So I thank officers for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Clark, I think the Chairman was just deferring to your seniority in terms of rank. Plus, I'm giving the Chairman left home. Yeah, I'm broadly in favour of this application. I just wanted to make sure that the Mr. Riddle mentioned the materials used for the roofing the property. I just wondered if that was going to could be reflected in the condition. I think he wanted sort of more traditional tiles to be included. I don't know if that's possible.
There is a condition requiring details to be submitted, and obviously once we get those, we will consult our conservation officer to ensure they are appropriate. So we will see those details and consider them in terms of the historic building and its setting, its setting within the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Just to be precise, could that be done in conjunction with local members, please?
It's entirely up to members. It's obviously not common to kind of add that on a condition on a relatively minor scheme. When we have a conservation officer to consult, if members feel that's fundamental to the acceptability, that's with you. But I wouldn't suggest it was necessary, but that's a decision for you members. Thank you.
The reason why I say that is in view of the past history of the site and sensitivity of the site. Normally I would certainly not consider it, but I think to assuage local population.
I think we need to make our decisions based on planning matters, not because residents may be unhappy with the decision, but if members feel that's necessary in planning terms, then that is something that we can add to the condition.
Back to the member, Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Clark said about section 3.5 of the report, which does refer to nearly a 4,000 litre tank, not a 1,700 litre tank, as the officer referred to in his verbal report. That is a significant size, and I do have some concerns about where it's going to go. So I would urge officers to think carefully about that one when they get the details. And that was all. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, do you want to take forward the proposal you just mentioned?
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
Sorry, do you want to take forward? You mentioned there about local members being informed or involved in?
We're certainly informed in consultation, why not? But I mean, it's really more for information purposes rather than anything else.
Thank you.
Councillor Cott, do you want that within the actual wording of the condition, or do you want that just noted in the minutes or something? What is your proposal?
Proposal is that it would be entered into the proposal.
Into the condition?
Yes, okay. Why not?
And Councillor Clark, can I just clarify what condition? Is that in terms of the materials, condition 3?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to propose that, Councillor Clark? Do we have a seconder? Okay, all those in favour?
That is unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
For the minutes, could I clarify the seconder, just because we had a few hands up? Thank you.
I had my hand raised to ask a question, but I'm sorry, Sam, I didn't see you.
Apologies, I didn't see your hand being raised, but you can
I wanted
ask the
to know about
question
the
while we made a
parking.
decision.
Yeah.
You can still ask the question.
Well, there were questions raised there about the parking for the site, and given that we were last here to talk about the fact that there'd been a retrospective request to move the garage because it'd been put in the wrong place, I'm just wondering what has been done to make sure that there is adequate parking for what is now added accommodation when it was horticultural use in the past.
I think we need to refer to the initial report that went to committee, which covered parking. Obviously, it was deferred for certain reasons, which didn't include parking. But if you bear with us a second, we can look at that initial report. If anyone else spots in. I think Councillor Bateman, we can come back to you on that part, but obviously as we've made a decision on it, I think it's not critical for us to find that information now because committee have approved it, but we will come back to you with that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is DC 23-1361, St Crispin's Church, Church Place, Pulborough. Could the officer please make the presentation?
Okay, thank you. So Council should note that since the report was published, we've received the appeal decision for the previous scheme refused under DC 22-1428. This was for exactly the same scheme as currently proposed for 6 dwellings. The only reason for refusal related to water neutrality, and the appeal was dismissed by the inspector also on the grounds of insufficient water neutrality. This was on the basis that a completed legal agreement secured the water neutrality measures had not been submitted as part of the appeal. The inspector found the scheme appropriate on matters such as the impact on heritage assets and ecology. Council should also note that conditions 8 and 9 are the same condition. This is an error, therefore one of these conditions is to be deleted. There's also an additional condition to be added stating that the scheme shall be implemented in accordance with the tree protection measures outlined in the submitted arboricultural method statement. Thank you. So location that you see the application relates to an existing church hall sited on the northern side of Church Place, Pulborough. The site comprises a parking area to the front of the site with pedestrian access from the street and vehicular access to the rear, shared with a cul-de-sac serving dwellings to the north. The site is located within the built-up area boundary and is within the Pulborough Church Place conservation area. The surrounding area is varied in character, comprising a mix of detached and terraced dwellings, various ages and style, Ramblers is a Grade 2 listed building located on the adjacent side of the street to the south. So here we see the picture of the existing church hall in place. Turning to proposed layout, this shows the 6 dwellings in place. This illustrates a pair of semi-detached dwellings and a terrace of 3 dwellings facing Church Place, with pedestrian access to the front within modest front garden curtilage with planting, with plot 2 benefiting from vehicle access and parking from the street. The existing access to the site, which leads to the cul-de-sac to the rear, serves 4 dwellings, would open to a communal parking area and leads to the detached dwelling to the rear. So I've got mouthful there. So here you see the elevations of a proposed pair of semis. Traditionally, a traditional appearance in brick with tile hanging to the first floor, clay tile roof, timber windows and timber doors. You can see quarry details here above the windows and to the corners of the building. So this is the elevation of the 3 houses. Again, these are proposed in brick with quarry details with timber windows and doors. This is the elevation of the detached dwelling, which includes a cat-side roof, small pitched roof dormers, and this would include timber cladding. So here we see an artist's impression of the street scene, showing the pair of semis and row of houses in line facing the street. Overall, the proposed dwellings are considered an acceptable terms for the design within this setting, offering a varied design that would not appear out of context and preserve the setting of the conservation area and nearby listed building. This shows a proposed plan of a pair of semis with your 4-bedroom houses. Okay, so as outlined in the report, evidence has been submitted to support the loss of the church hall, which is no longer required for worship, along with marketing that indicates the hall is no longer viable for an alternative use, and this partly takes into account the current state of the building. The proposal is considered appropriate in relation to all other relevant planning matters, including its impact on adjacent properties, ecology, transport impacts, and impact on heritage assets. Proposal is also considered water neutral, with the offsetting proposed for the 6 dwellings. The offsetting for this scheme would be via a cattle farm at Daneville Farm, which is within the Horsham district. This farm is used currently for the rearing of 300 cattle. The proposed offsetting would entail rainwater harvesting to replace the mains water supply at the farm, and would save more than enough water to offset the water demand for these 6 houses, and this would need to be secured in a legal agreement. Proposal is therefore recommended for approval in accordance with the completion of a legal agreement and recommended conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I invite Michael Walsh, please, and remind you that you have 2 minutes.
I'm actually speaking on behalf of the 4 residents to the north of this development. The road that the developers are actually thinking of using for access is a privately owned road between 3 of us. Not once has the developer bothered to pick up the phone or ask us. There is a covenant in place which allows them right of access. It doesn't allow right of parking, right of waiting, or any access for construction traffic. So what I'd like to know is, how do they propose to get diggers, lorries doing deliveries into that site as it stands just now, because they can't use the road that we own. Also, since the A29 has had the landslide, access up and down that road for pedestrians has become exceptionally dangerous. It's now one of the main ways to get to the train station. It's the main way for children that live at the bottom end of the village to get to school. I've seen it 2 or 3 times in the past couple of weeks where kids have nearly been ran over. I've seen it myself where I've taken my wife out, who's in a wheelchair, and we've tried to get round the corner and there's a car come tearing down, and we've had to pull back very sharpishly. The actual access road on Church Place, the main access coming up from the A29, is not built to take any more traffic. It's a physical impossibility. By the time you look at the parked cars, lorries can't get past. I watched it again this morning. I watched a scaffold lorry try to get past and have to reverse back out onto the main road. I hope the councillors take all this into account, that since the A29 has been more or less shut and restricted to one-way traffic going up and down Church Hill, all access to that area has become unlivable. Not one of the people that live in the four houses to the north of Church Place want this development, right down to the fact that if it does start, we are talking about putting a gate up in the bottom part of the turning circle, which will then stop access for delivery lorries.
Could I just ask you bring your points to conclusion, please?
My points are that I think this should be rejected until accessing from the A29 is resolved and access along that road is resolved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Andy Tilbrook, 2 minutes, please.
I'm both representing myself and the neighbourhood plan in this presentation. First point is that this site has never been put forward to the neighbourhood plan. The Catholic Church who owned it have been aware of the neighbourhood plan for at least 10 years, and the current developers have been aware since at least 2021 when they put their first application in for this site. The proposal should be rejected because it's not coming through the neighbourhood plan. Secondly, the traffic survey that was done for this was done during the pandemic when there was very little movement along. I mean, my own mother-in-law was in the Anchorage care home and we weren't allowed to visit. No visiting was allowed when they did the traffic survey. Similarly, schools were restricted in access. And finally, the point at which they did the traffic survey was some way into Church Place from the A29, so it misses out any traffic to the majority of houses in Church Place, and also misses out the traffic which would come from the Church of England. So the traffic survey needs to be redone at a location nearer the junction of Church Place and the A29. On water neutrality, I've got two main points. The Danefold farm site is used by as offset for a site in Chichester District Council as well as sites in Horsham District Council. I don't understand how the two can be easily reconciled and taken account of. It needs to have a firm metering scheme with firm monitoring. And also I note that for this development, the argument uses average figures, and we have a period where we're in more intense wet weather and more intense dry weather, and I do not think that the water neutrality mitigation works when the weather is very dry. The other point is that they're not doing any recovery of drainage water or grey water on site. And this is something which is recommended by Natural England. So, you know, it's just something which needs to be done. Again, it comes back to the same point as the previous application I spoke about. Southern Water do not model the flow through the sewerage system directly. There's a monitoring at the house of Ovingdean to the northeast of the church. That data needs to be used in any modelling of the site. And finally, on local amenity, I've lived in the site area for 32 years. Throughout all of that period, parking has been allowed on the Catholic Church site, both by residents and by people from the Church of England. Now, this development will mean that that opportunity completely goes, and vehicles parked on Church Place frequently are vandalised. So there's a huge loss of amenity there. Too few parking spaces will be left in Church Place, which are available for the use of local residents and the C of E. Half the properties in Church Place do not have any space for parking on their curtilages. So that's a loss of amenity.
Could I ask that you bring your points to a conclusion, please?
Right, and the final point is a minor one. It states that this development will not impact my own property. It will. The trees are such that there's, even when the trees are in leaf, there's visibility between number 6 and my back garden, and there's visibility of the church from my back garden is restricted by those houses, so I lose the amenity of the view of the Anglican Church. So that's it for now. Thank you very much, and I hope you reject this proposal.
Thank you. Billy Clements, please. And mindful that you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this item on behalf of Earlswood Homes. This application, as identified by your officers, follows an earlier identical scheme for 6 houses on the site, which was refused solely due to water neutrality. Our current submission resolves this single technical issue. The proposals are accompanied by a robust and viable water neutrality solution, which minimises on-site mains water use and offsets the residual demand for a system of rainwater harvesting and recycling at a cattle farm elsewhere in Horsham district. We're delighted that after extensive technical work and negotiations, both your officers and Natural England have concluded that the solution we have proposed will ensure water neutrality and avoid any adverse effect on the integrity of protected sites. The Section 106 agreement required to secure these measures has already been drafted and is anticipated to be finalised shortly. This is a viable and deliverable solution to a complex issue. The Council's previous decision and the recent appeal decision, which your officers have referred to, for the identical scheme on the site, confirms that this proposed development is acceptable in all other respects. It has been agreed that the vacant church, which closed in 2019, is surplus to requirements and that its loss is justified. The recent appeal decision confirms that the scheme would fit in with local character, noting that the proposed layout would better assimilate with the pattern of development on Church Place and that the design would preserve the character and appearance of the Conservation Office area. An earlier appeal decision for a 7-unit scheme equally confirmed that the design was acceptable. As comprehensively discussed in the committee report, our proposals have been designed to respect neighbours, and the new homes are positioned to maximise separation distances and avoid adverse amenity impacts. We welcome the fact that West Sussex County Council continue to confirm that the access arrangements to the site would be safe, with suitable space for turning and parking, and that the development would not result in unacceptable congestion. Comments made by third parties in relation to ownership or rights of access are, respectfully, private legal matters which are not material to your consideration this evening. This proposal therefore overcomes the issue of water neutrality, which was the sole reason for the previous identical application could not be supported. In light of the
Could I just ask that you bring your point to conclusion, please?
Absolutely. In light of the clear finding by the Council and the appeal decision that the scheme is acceptable in all other respects, we therefore hope that the committee will be able to support your officers' much positive recommendation and enable the delivery of much needed high quality new homes to come forward on this
I did say bring you
redundant
to
site.
conclusion. You've
Thank
had
you.
more than 2 minutes, so
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, I'll just come back on a few matters. So, with the private,
Should we do the parish first?
We're ahead of ourselves. Sorry, Councillor Jeannie Esdale, Former Parish Council. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Esdale.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking on behalf of Pulborough Parish Council. And, sorry, electronics. There we go. As the committee is aware, the refusal of the applicant's previous application has recently been upheld by the Planning Inspectorate. This is just last week. The application before you now is not materially different, and so it should be refused again. The objections remain: failure to demonstrate compliance with protecting Arun Valley Special Area of Conservation, SAC, Special Protection Area and Ramsar sites, the Arun Valley sites. The site was never, as was mentioned before by my colleagues, never included in the Pulborough. There was no discussion of the Pulborough's neighborhood plan with us. And overdevelopment in a conservation area this is our conservation area. It is not a huge area, but it is very, very special. And any interference with the access, there's so much involved in this very small area. You've got infrastructure issues that we've talked about before. The whole village is affected by sewage and flooding. The A29 has been a problem for quite some time, and again, it is specifically affecting this little street. The parking, it's actually a narrow, single-lane road, and the parking is car after car. It's very dangerous to walk, and I know that they mentioned about children and getting to school and people going to the train station. But one thing I also want to really point out is that when the traffic survey was done, the implement that they used to track on the ground was put on the far western side of the road of Church Place during the biggest shutdown of COVID. So people weren't moving around anyway. They weren't supposed to be. And the most traffic that would come from that side is really the horse boxes that would come through for the racing. And that's a seasonal thing anyway. So the traffic, it starts right before this proposed development with people that live in the area. And to add more traffic on to where it is, we also have the Anchorage care home dementia unit that is on our plan, our neighborhood plan, and it will be developed. So that's another addition to traffic on that little street. It just can't handle anymore. 5, 6, 10, 12, I don't know what the average would be, but it really needs common sense here to not accept this development. And we would hope that you would appreciate the concerns we have. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so just come back on a few matters. So we're aware of the fact that this is a privately owned road. That's not necessarily a planning matter. It would be down to the applicant to secure that rights of access. So it's not something we can refuse the application on. It's like covenants attached to a property are not relevant to planning. That would be for the applicant to arrange access, and that would also be the case with arranging access for the building of the if it's got approved through the construction. So that is a separate matter, not something we can take into account. Also, it should be noted that all the letters and comments on the two previous applications would have been forwarded to the inspector, and residents would have also been given a chance to comment further. So all those comments would have been taken into account by the inspector. But however, the previous schemes were not refused on the grounds of amenity, for example, or design. They were refused on the grounds of the water neutrality statement. So yes, this isn't part of the neighbourhood plan, but it's worth noting that this is within the built-up area boundary. So in accordance with the development plan, that is the development here is acceptable in principle, and so then in that respect, it's also in accordance with the neighbourhood plan for building within the built-up area boundary. So the water neutrality, that is for the site in Chichester, and it may be the case that there is excess there which can be used for other sites, and that would have to be taken into account, and that would have to be part of the legal agreements would take that into account when we're assessing the water neutrality through the obligations. In terms of impact on neighbours, that has been taken into account thoroughly in the report, and there's no windows overlooking, direct windows overlooking any of the adjacent properties, and sufficient distance between the properties that we think is acceptable. So for the water neutrality for the existing properties, condition 8 requires details of water neutrality for each dwelling to be submitted for approval, so that way we can secure the offsetting and the mitigation, not offsetting, sorry, we secure the efficiency measures, that's the one, yeah, for each dwelling to be submitted to be approved. Right. So the highways, there's been comments regarding the surveys that were taking part, but that's only part of the consideration which highways have to take into account. And one important thing is to mention the previous scheme, which was for 7 dwellings, they did their own tricks. So tricks is short for, I did write it down. Right, TRIX is short for Transport Assessment Information Computer System. So they ran it through their own system, and this highlights that and then you have to take into account the previous use and the existing use of this site as a community centre with its large car park. And they said there would be no significant change in trips or at the access or the highway that could be considered to give rise to any highway safety or capacity concerns. So it's not just a matter that you can challenge the survey. The highways also take into account their own assessment, and take into account what the existing use, and also this is within the built-up area boundary. So it's not in an isolated location as such. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Calling on the ward councillors, this time, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I will be interested to hear what Councillor Clark has to say, so I normally get to hear first. Anyway, back on a serious note, there's just a couple of things I picked up from the papers we got, especially in terms of some of the objections put forward by the parish council. I just wanted to clarify whether I'm right in thinking that the development is of a size that at least one of the buildings, the property, should have been of an affordable nature.
No, that's not the case. The limit is 10 and above.
Oh, it's 10, right, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so it's just something I wanted clarification on. But earlier on we discussed, obviously, if there were any material changes since we'd had comments from statutory bodies contributing to the application. And I would have thought that the fact that the road that leads to where the development's going to be placed is no longer accessible should be material to the application. And I would have thought that it would be reasonable to request that any decisions deferred until the A29's open and there's proper access.
Firstly, the latest decision was last week.
Yeah.
So obviously that's the latest decision. So a decision was considered to be acceptable last week. So I think we have to bear in mind that's the latest decision on this site.
Yeah,
it's only a week old in terms of material considerations. So I think that's the first thing to be mindful of.
Yeah, I'm just questioning the reasonableness of it rather than the time bound.
Yeah, we can't defer an application for an unspecified amount of time. We've got no objections from County Highways. The appeal decision last week didn't raise any objections on highway grounds. So I think you're on very tricky ground to request a deferral for an unspecified amount of time. I think when we have the support from County Highways, who obviously will be familiar with the local road network and the existing the current problem. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. I think we recognise that the issues that there are at the moment, but I'm not aware that's a longer term issue. And it's a bit like with construction, isn't it? When you construct a site, there is some short term impact on amenity, but that's not a reason why you would refuse the application. So I think we need to be mindful of where we are, and the no objections from County Highway. So I think in the absence of any evidence from County Highway saying it's a significant issue or we should impose conditions to delay it in any way, then I think it would be unreasonable for us to do so. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Sorry, Chairman, just making notes so I don't forget. I've got several questions for officers before making any statements. I refer to appeal reference APP Z3825W2333244414, which is basically the last appeal that was turned down. What's not clear to me, but I want clarification, is, and I quote, in paragraph 13 and 14, he basically said, a draft unilateral undertaking has been submitted but not received. Updated version of UU has not been provided. And then he next says, as a draft UU is not signed or dated by the parties entering into the agreement is not enforceable. How does that, what's different in that context, what's different between then and now? That's my first question. You might say that the water mitigation mechanism used is different. I think that is the case, but I'm not quite sure why this hasn't just been turned down because nothing's changed. So can you please clarify for me?
So as part of an appeal decision, at the point in which you issue a decision, the inspector.
The appeal decision, you
Yeah,
mean?
so
Or-
the appeal
right,
decision,
okay.
or any decision really, but in the context we're talking about the appeal decision. So at the point in which you issue a decision, you would need to have a signed legal agreement which secures the water neutrality measures. Now, if
Right.
members make a decision today, you are not issuing the decision. That happens after. So the recommendation is you approve it subject to the signing of a legal agreement, which is normal practice, isn't it? So then once that decision is made by committee, in terms of the committee decision, that legal agreement is signed, and then the council issues the decision. So before the formal decision is issued by the council, the legal agreement is signed. That is standard practice, and that's what would happen. But at the point the decision was issued by the inspector, they did not have a signed legal agreement. But
Got
we
it.
will
Okay.
have a signed legal agreement when we issue a decision, and we won't issue a decision without one.
Okay, thanks, got that. I'd point out, in response to some of the stuff I heard here today, is that the planning inspector basically did say that the proposed layout and detailing of the proposed dwellings, the appeal would preserve the listed building, the setting, and any other features of special and historic interest that it possesses. So basically that addresses the issue of is it in keeping or not in keeping. So to turn this down on those grounds would be a bit iffy, really. I find it interesting, though, that he actually says in paragraph 22 that as I found the proposal to be unacceptable for any other reasons, it's not necessary for me to explore such matters further here, such as highway safety and highway matters. So that was not considered in the appeal. I'm particularly concerned in terms of highways. I hear the points you make about highways, but there has been material changes that make it challengeable, in my opinion, because the A29 landslide happened. The A29 basically closed the A29 except traffic light conditions, which means pedestrians can't use the way they used to use, which has increased significantly the pedestrian traffic along Church Place. That is a material condition, that is a material change. Please tell me I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, but I see it as a material change that's not been considered by county highways in view of what's happening just down the road. So if you could come back to me on that, I'd be grateful. Can officers confirm in paragraph 6.46 that basically there will be a sort of a bookkeeping exercise making absolutely sure that there's no double counting on water neutrality, and that basically there will be not due process, but Mark Bainham's an accountant, got accounting training. It's sort of an accounting type procedure to make sure that things are kosher, if I can put it that way. And I'm looking to you, Mark, because you've got accounting training, so you can probably put it in better words than me.
Well, I would just say that I'm not an accountant by profession.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought you were. Okay, fine. And in the detail, if I look at 6.23 and 6.26, basically I would have thought that the small window at first floor level should be obscured as a condition, and that in 6.26 it says presumably obscured, glazed. I delete the presumably and make sure that it is obscured. But I wonder if officers could come back to me on my comments, please. I realise that there are a number of them.
I'll try and remember it all, Councillor Clark, if I miss
I'll
it,
remind
let
you
me
if
know.
there's a
Yeah,
problem.
thanks. In terms of double counting, there is a collection of data across the whole water resource zone in terms of, and we've got a couple of sites which are operating in this way. So it's discussions are being had, data is being collected to ensure that there isn't double counting in that respect. In terms of the highways matters, you're right, the inspector said that, but obviously the decision of the council when we refused it on water neutrality grounds was that highways was acceptable. I appreciate that was at that point in time. Yeah, I'll get on to the next bit. But obviously that it was considered by the council. I appreciate the inspector, didn't, it's a line they use, unfortunately, that isn't helpful for us, but that I appreciate that. In terms of the current highway matters, my understanding is it's not a road closure in perpetuity. And I think it's difficult to make a judgment on what is a temporary matter. I think obviously we have got up-to-date highway comments on this, which and everybody is aware of the local issue. So if they considered it unacceptable, that they would raise that. As I said, I think it's unreasonable to refuse something from what is a temporary matter. And also it's unreasonable just to defer it to a point in time when that might be resolved. I think we have to be mindful here. We've got a brownfield site in a built-up area boundary. We have a critical housing need. This is the kind of sites that we should be seeking to approve. So I think members should be mindful of that. And obviously, in the absence of highway ejection, I think it's very difficult to substantiate concerns. And my colleague will just comment on the windows.
Okay. So if you look here, that shows the existing church, and you've got Milton there to the east and the Hermitage just to the north. So you argue, and then you've got the properties to the south there. You could argue they're the most affected properties. So in terms of plot, so plot 1 is facing Milton, and plot 6, they're both facing, if you look at the elevations for those, hold on, let me just, so that's a pair of semis. So you can see that there's a very small window there. So, and I don't think there's any windows as the Milton's facing this property. So that's not been recommended for obscure glazing, but it can be standard conditioned for it to be obscure glazing up to a point of 1.7 meters above finished floor level. And so that would alleviate those concerns. And that would also be the case with plot 6 there. So if you look again, plot 6, it doesn't, it's only got that one window there, which I'm not sure if that faces there, but again, that could be, we could condition that to be obscure glazed and up to a finished floor height if councillors consider that necessary.
If I can go back, thank you. I would appreciate that if the committee agrees. Just sticking with the highways issues, I mean, the issue, as somebody said, is all in the timing, and I will leave it at that. The issue is, I can't remember exactly when County Highways did their assessment. So the question for me is, if the assessment is a recent one, let's say in the last 6 months, that's one thing. If it's an assessment that was done 2 years ago, then it's a different thing. And that's why I'm asking the question, because I still think it's a material change if one was done quite a long time ago and not updated. Because you said County Highways would have brought it up if it was a problem, but if the question hasn't been asked, then they wouldn't have brought it up, would they?
We're just checking the dates on that.
I'm sorry, it's not something I was thinking of asking, because I normally concentrate on water neutrality rather than the highways issues, but
No, I'll wait for the officers, but I think I know when that was, just before we answer. Any other questions? Yeah, sorry, Sam. That's right, Councillor Beaton.
First of all, I'm just really disappointed to hear that this is a developer that's not engaged with the residents, especially when they're going to be so reliant on them, given that it's a private road that they're going to rely on them to be using. So I'm very disappointed to hear that. But I've really just got 2 queries. One is to do with the number of spaces per property and whether or not that is going to be sufficient for the needs of those homes. And second, it links to something that the parish have asked about the design of the homes and whether or not they're going to be in keeping with the Sussex vernacular. And I'm wondering whether or not condition 11 is trying to address that, or whether or not something additional could be included to pick up on the parish's concern about how well they link to the aesthetics of the area.
think what we would say is we have to be consistent in our decision making. The council only refused a previous application on water neutrality grounds and considered all other elements acceptable. The inspector commented on the design and considered it to be acceptable. So we can't, you know, whilst I've recognised the local concerns, in planning terms, it is acceptable. And two previous decisions, both of the council and the inspector, have also considered it acceptable. So I think it, you know, we're not on great grounds if we're then now raising concerns. That would be my opinion. Thank you.
Any, Councillor Knoll, yeah, oh, sorry, come to you in a moment. Councillor Knoll, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I might be being a bit thick here. I just wanted to, I need to laugh.
We wouldn't laugh, would we?
I just wanted to check on the security that the council is going to hold for the water offsetting in terms of the water neutrality question, which is obviously why this has come back now to council, to committee. What is the security? Is it a herd of cattle?
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
I was trying to find.
What is the water neutrality scheme?
Oh, right, okay,
Water
so yes,
neutrality
it's a council.
offsetting
So it's
is
an existing
secured
farm.
by what?
Well,
The
so
amount of water the cattle drink, sorry.
yes, so
So-
based on that, they've got a significant number of cattle. I think it was 300, which are currently using the water from the water supply. So that could be for drinking or cleaning, or you know, I'm not exactly sure, but that has been evidence to us that there is an existing baseline there. So they're saying that they're no longer going to use the mains water, and so that's an offsetting there. That's a saving from water being used, and they're going to replace that with other measures such as rainwater harvesting. So you've got a saving there in terms of.
And how are we securing that?
So they've submitted all the details which are considered acceptable. So we secure that through a legal agreement. So this application is subject to the completion of a legal agreement. So we'd need to see, like for example, you'd need to see that those measures are in place, and we need to see what savings are being made, and then you're able to say that the houses can then be built once you've ascertained that those measures are in place and the measures that they've said are actually being delivered.
Okay, so in an age where cattle farming is going out of style very quickly, I mean, there are very, very few cattle farmers left in Sussex now for economic reasons. Cattle farms are changing over to viniculture or other arable farming. What happens if whilst water neutrality exists, what happens if the cows all die or get slaughtered, or the herd changes to arable farming? What security are we going to have then?
Well, we've got to be. We have to be sure that these things can be kept in perpetuity. So we'd look at the viability of the farm, and so it's been existing for a certain amount of time. So they must have shown us. I mean, I'm not sure about. I didn't go through the details. They must have shown us that there's a viable business with a long-term prospects of being kept in perpetuity. Because it's always, as you said, that's always an issue here. It's like, can we keep these measures in place to ensure the water neutrality, and the legal agreement will require those measures to be in place in perpetuity as well to secure those measures.
But I think ultimately, if the cows go, the water usage goes. So I think that's, and we have had this discussion at committees before, so I think we just need to be mindful that we have allowed, not a huge amount, but we have allowed a small number of applications where there's offsetting on a farm. So and there's been one early appeal decision that we had in that respect. So I think we need to be mindful that principle has already been established. And the argument, well, what happens if you've got less cows as well, less water's used, and therefore you're not in a really different position, it's still water neutral.
Yeah, I understand that, but supposing the cattle herd is got rid of in some way, and the farmer quite naturally wants to replace it with some kind of agriculture rather than livestock, how how are you going to save the water then? Because they're going to need water from the water system to water their crops.
But ultimately, the measures they put in place have to be in place in perpetuity, so they will continue to save water, and that water can be used for cows or other agricultural activities. They will have to keep it in place. So there's no point keeping it in place and not using it, is it? Really, they will have to keep it in place, and that will be secured through the legal agreement.
Okay, fair enough. I just thought I'd ask a question. Thank you.
We'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Bateman, but I think
Actually, I'd like to, you actually didn't answer both of my questions. You quickly moved on to the other person, so it's the second.
Apologies, yep, go ahead, please, sorry.
So I asked also about parking spaces and how many had been allowed and whether or not that was enough for the properties.
We're just looking for that. If I come back to Councillor Clark's comment about the highway comments, the latest ones I can find are dated the 19th of August 2022. So whilst they're on this application, it looks like they've been carried over from the previous application, so they're not, yeah, so.
Just 15 parking spaces. Sorry, and the report says there's 15 parking spaces. Yes.
So that's working on the basis of 2 for how many bedroom properties?
These are 3 and 4 bedroom properties.
I personally don't believe that's adequate.
But I think we need to bear in mind the council have already considered that acceptable. The council, that's all of us, including us officers, made a decision that only refused it on water neutrality grounds. So I think, again, whilst I recognise there are some local concerns, we need to be mindful of the decisions that we've already made.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Back to water. I note with interest that the water saving here is being done in open ponds, which I don't think we've had before, which is interesting because the water neutrality report from the developer says the additional flows into the pond will offset any additional losses due to evaporation. My question is, will it? It's clearly not been demonstrated in the reports that we've seen. And given the changing climate that we're looking at, evaporation might well become critical, I would suggest. So I would like some reinforcement of that water neutrality calculation, if we can do that, please.
I'm afraid, Councillor Croker, we can't answer that answer today. I don't have sufficient information for us to be able to answer that. So obviously, if members consider that's critical for your assessment, that's something we would have to go away and find out. We don't have that information before us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Marks, before I go back to
yes, just continuing the water theme. It strikes me, looking at the Daneford Farm proposal, that they look able to save 13,200, or rather collect 13,200 litres per day of water. From where? I'd say, it's not necessarily going to rain every day. Got quite erratic weather at the moment. I think, setting up an offsetting scheme and gambling against future rainfall strikes me as somewhat risky. Thank you.
Just to say as well, we need to be consistent in decision making, because we have made decisions across the district for different uses where rainwater harvesting has been used and the level of storage is increased to take into account periods of drought. So again, I think we just need to be mindful that, not this particular application, but the general principle of allowing that has already been established. Thank you.
I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Clark, do you want to come back on any point there at all?
No, I've made my point about the highways issue, which we'll continue to discuss, I imagine.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Van der Burg.
Thank you, Chair.
that water that ends up in the ponds, is probably coming down, trickling down some stream, would more than likely end up in the channel if it wasn't captured. So hopefully we'll be seeing a bit more of this kind of water capture going forward as a resolution of some of our water problems. And also with regards to farming, if you swap the cows out and you put arable in, well, you're not going to water your arable. So it is a saving.
Thank you. Councillor Circus, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. The comment I wanted to make is a comment I pursued before, but I remain unhappy about it. It is the wording, of course, of the recommendation, which is the completion of the legal agreement within 3 months. Emma will remember, because it's a case that's dear to her heart, when there was a similar recommendation based on 3 months, and the 3 months was allowed to slide, and I think ended up at 7 months. And I do wonder whether there's a way the committee could tighten this up, because basically, as I understand it, and no doubt the officers will tell me if I'm wrong on this, but in practice, this allows considerable discretion, and the 3 months can become any period you like. And as I say, in the particular case that I have in mind, it went to 7 months because it is discretionary. And I do wonder whether we couldn't make that 3 month period, put more of a discipline behind it and be more willing to turn the application down if the 3 month period is not complied with. And if we're saying that 3 months is insufficient, maybe we ought to say 4 months or 6 months. But I think it makes a bit of a nonsense of the recommendation when we appear to be very loose in bringing the shutters down, so to speak, after 3 months, when in practice it seems to me from the cases I've known, we don't do that. We can let things slide on for quite some time. If I could raise that as an issue, Chairman.
I think I'd better answer that, because obviously it's going to be my team that would be responsible for dealing with the 106 agreement. Unfortunately, although we're now fully staffed, it's not always been like that. And so we've allowed time. It's not necessarily delay on the other side. It's possibly sometimes in the council. The case, I've just been reading the case officer's notes actually. The section 106 for this particular matter is underway. We've got queries that have gone out to the other side, but it's for the case officer who's expecting surgery. So there's going to be possibly a transfer of file there. I can see it coming. So, we need to make sure that in binding other people to certain deadlines, we don't end up strangling ourselves. Thank you, Chair.
It's probably not probably the information is not available today, but it'd be interesting to know. This is a pretty standard condition, the 3 month condition. I understand, circumstances arise. It would be interesting to know, and as I say, I appreciate it probably isn't available tonight, and there's no urgency for it, to know how often the 3 month period that is common to these recommendations, it appears regularly, is actually adhered to. If that information, it'd be interesting if that sort of information could be collected, we could have some idea of whether the 3 month period is indeed normally a relevant period. Because if it isn't, I don't know why we put it in the recommendation.
If I may, councillors, I think it's just important just to recognise why we put it in. We put it in because it's to seek to speed up decision making and ensure the applicant isn't, you know, sat back and relaxing whilst progress could be made and we issue a decision. But ultimately, as my colleague have said, it's two-sided in that respect. So I think the reason it's put on there is to seek to issue decisions as soon as reasonable possible. It's not a stick to beat anybody with, and I don't really see the benefit of analysing data to look at what went past it and what's not, because if there was a reasonable reason why it went past the 3 months, because, you know, negotiations were positive but it was complex, or, you know, one of our colleagues had surgery or whatever, I don't, you know, that it's not a definitive point. It's just to ensure that we continue to make progress on it, and it's really with discretion that we can go beyond that. What I would say though is, if any of you have read the new planning consultation on the accelerated planning system, things will have to speed up. So I think going forward we will have to review that as part of wider changes in the planning system, but probably not right now. So I think it's something we're mindful of, and it might be that we need to have them, you know, ready to go before committee. I think we'll have to consider what we do, because we will be under significant pressure, well, and measured nationally on our speed of decision making, much more so than we are now. So I think changes will come, and I'm not keen to do an exercise, Councillor Serkis, on looking at that data now, when I think it will be considered as part of a wider package of improvements we'll have to consider across the planning service. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, you commented earlier about, there was a comment around obscure the windows on the side. Would you like that added to the conditions?
Thank you, Chairman. If committee is minded to approve, then yes, I would, please.
We need someone to put that forward as a motion to add a condition that obscures the window. Seconder? This is the window at the side of the property, yes. All those in favour?
Just to note that Councillor Manton, if you leave the room during any part of the debate, all the debate has to be heard to be able to vote on the item.
Sorry,
just
you left.
Sorry, did you want to?
No, go on, please.
To be able to vote on the item, you have to be present throughout all of the discussion. Unfortunately, as you left the room, you would not be able to vote on this item.
I have a medical condition that the council has been informed of, and the chief exec has allowed me dispensation to leave meetings as long as I do it discreetly and return.
Can I just clarify then with the counting of the vote? I believe the only person who didn't have their hand up was Councillor Trollope, is that correct? Apologies, I couldn't see it round. So that was
amendment's carried, yeah.
So the amendment was carried and it was unanimous from what I found.
Sorry, we've got a bit confused. Sorry, can we just vote on that again, please?
I think we need to clarify what we're voting. That's okay, but we're voting on the recommendation as printed with the additional condition relating to the obscure glazing. That's my understanding as what we're voting on.
Yes.
Yeah, as printed, with all the conditions plus a condition regarding obscure glazing. Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm just still a little concerned that the Highways recommendation was so out of date, and that there's been such a change since.
Well, ultimately the decision is with members, so if you feel that there should be a different decision, there needs to be an alternative motion. Obviously we've had one alternative motion and therefore we should vote on that. Obviously if that fails, then it will be open to members to put forward an alternative motion.
Going back to what we voted on, was the motion put forward by Councillor Clark. And just to reiterate that vote, because there was some confusion.
Sorry, on a point of order, Mr. Chairman, all I said was basically is that if it went to a vote on this and nothing else intervened, that basically I would like the obscured windows to be included. But I wasn't proposing to council that we make a proper vote on it because other things might still come forward.
Is anyone proposing an alternative motion?
Yeah, could I propose that we defer and have highways look at it up to date with the current highways arrangements?
The motion is that we defer
For one cycle to allow highways to reevaluate the site based on up-to-date conditions on the A29.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Campbell. All those in favour of that motion, please raise your hands.
There's 11 for.
All those against that motion?
3 against.
Abstentions? I could abstain, yeah.
That's 3 abstentions.
Okay, thank you. The motion is carried, deferred for one cycle.
I'm going to look into that.
Sorry, moving on to the next item, urgent business. There is no urgent business, but I would just like to thank the officers for their contribution this evening and for excellent committee reports that they produced, and I'd like to thank members for their patience. Thank you. And at 20:39, I bring the meeting to a close.